Across the vast steppes of Mongolia, a child was born who would reshape the world. His birth name was Temujin, but history would know him as Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. If you enjoy this journey through history, like the video and subscribe to the channel for more epic historical tales. From the windswept grasslands where nomadic tribes wandered with their herds would emerge the largest contiguous land empire in human history. This is the story of how a tribal outcast became the Great Khan, how Mongol horsemen conquered from China to Eastern Europe, and how their legacy echoes through 8 centuries to our modern world. The Mongolian steppes stretch beyond the horizon like an endless ocean of grass. Here, beneath the eternal blue sky that the Mongols call Tengri, the landscape changes with the seasons in an ancient rhythm. Winter brings bitter cold that can freeze a man's breath in his lungs. The temperature drops to 40 degrees below zero. Snow covers the grasslands for months. Only the strongest survive. Spring arrives late but brings new life. The grass turns green almost overnight. Wildflowers bloom across millions of acres. Rivers swell with melting snow. The air fills with the sounds of migrating birds returning from the south. This is when the herds give birth. Foals, lambs and calves appear by the thousands. Summer transforms the steppes into a vast green carpet. The grass grows thick and nutritious. Herds grow fat on the abundant pasture. The days are long and warm. Thunderstorms roll across the plains, bringing rain that keeps the grass growing. But summer is short. The nomads know they must prepare for winter. Autumn brings the season of migration. The grass begins to turn brown. The herds must be moved to winter pastures. Families pack their felt homes called jurs or yurts. These portable dwellings can be taken down in an hour and loaded onto ox-drawn carts. The entire tribe moves together, following ancient routes their ancestors used for centuries. This harsh environment shaped the Mongol character. Survival required incredible toughness. Children learned to ride horses before they could walk properly. By age 5, Mongol children could stay in the saddle all day. They learned to shoot arrows from horseback at full gallop. The bow became an extension of their arm. The nomadic life revolved around animals. Horses were the most precious. A Mongol warrior might own dozens of horses. Each horse had a specific purpose. Some were for battle, others for herding, still others for long journeys. The Mongols drank mare's milk fermented into an alcoholic drink called arag. They ate horse meat when necessary. Sheep provided wool for clothing and felt for their homes. Goats gave milk and meat. Cattle pulled the heavy carts that carried their possessions. Camels were used for trade expeditions across the Gobi Desert. Every animal had value. Wealth was measured in livestock, not gold. The jur, or yurt, represented nomadic ingenuity. Its wooden frame could be quickly assembled. Felt panels made from sheep's wool provided insulation. The entire structure could withstand fierce steppe winds. Inside, families lived in one room. The fire pit sat in the centre. Smoke escaped through a hole in the roof. Sacred objects hung on the walls. Family life followed strict traditions. The eldest male led the household. Women managed daily tasks but held significant influence. Children learned by watching and doing. There were no schools, only the harsh lessons of survival. Stories passed down through generations taught history, values, and proper behavior. Religion centered on shamanism and the worship of Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Shamans served as spiritual guides, healers, and fortune-tellers. They communicated with spirits through trance-like rituals. Sacred sites dotted the landscape. Certain mountains, rivers, and groves were considered holy. The Mongols believed spirits lived in these places. Weather dictated everything. A harsh winter could kill entire herds. Drought meant starvation. The nomads developed an intimate knowledge of weather patterns. They could read the sky like a book. Cloud formations told them when storms approached. Wind direction predicted temperature changes. This environment bred warriors of extraordinary skill. The constant need to protect herds from wolves, bears, and raiders created expert fighters. Horse archery became an art form. Mongol boys competed in shooting contests from childhood. They learned to hit moving targets while riding at full speed. The steppes connected Asia and Europe like a vast highway. Trade routes crossed this grassland ocean. Merchants from China travelled west carrying silk and spices. Persian traders moved east with gold and jewels. The Mongols controlled key sections of these routes. They charged tolls and provided protection. Natural resources were scarce. The steppes had little metal, stone, or wood. Everything had to be obtained through trade or raids. This scarcity forced the Mongols to become masters of adaptation. They learned to make do with less. Every tool served multiple purposes. The endless horizon shaped the Mongol mindset. There were always new pastures beyond the next ridge. New opportunities lay in every direction. This created a culture of exploration and expansion. The world seemed limitless to people who lived under the vast sky. The Mongolia of Temujin's birth was a fractured world of competing tribes. No single leader controlled the steppes. Instead, dozens of groups fought constantly for dominance. The Mongols were just one tribe among many. They were not even the most powerful. The Merkits controlled territories to the north and west. They were ancient enemies of the Mongols. Generations of blood feuds connected the two tribes. Merkit warriors were known for their fierce raids. They specialized in kidnapping women and horses. Their shamans claimed direct connection to powerful spirits. The Karaits dominated the central steppes. They had converted to Nestorian Christianity centuries earlier. This made them different from their shamanist neighbors. Their leader held the title of Khan. He commanded thousands of warriors. The Karaits had grown wealthy, controlling trade routes. The Naimans ruled the western regions. They were the most sophisticated tribe culturally. Some could read and write using the Uyghur script. Their Khan lived in relative luxury. He owned Chinese silk and Persian carpets. Naiman smiths created the finest weapons and jewelry. The Tatars held the eastern territories. They were the Mongols' most hated enemies. Generations of warfare had created deep animosity. The Tatars had killed many Mongol leaders. They served as allies to the Jin dynasty in China. This gave them access to Chinese weapons and gold. Smaller tribes filled the spaces between these major powers. The Taichud, Jadaran and Balas each controlled limited territories. They survived by forming temporary alliances with stronger neighbors. Leadership changed frequently as ambitious warriors challenged established khans. Tribal structure followed ancient patterns. Each tribe divided into clans based on blood relationships. Clans traced their descent from common ancestors. These ancestral connections determined social rank and political alliance. Marriage ties linked clans across tribal boundaries. Leadership operated on multiple levels. Individual families followed the eldest male. Clans elected their own leaders called Noyan. Tribes chose khans from among the most successful Noyan. These positions were not hereditary. A khan had to prove his worth through success in war and leadership. The Kurultai, or tribal assembly, made major decisions. All adult males could speak at these gatherings. Debates continued until consensus emerged. Women sometimes participated, especially widows of former leaders. The Kurultai could elect or depose khans based on their performance. Traditional warfare followed established patterns. Spring brought the raiding season. Warriors mounted swift ponies and struck enemy camps. They sought horses, sheep, women, and prestige. Speed and surprise were essential. Raiders avoided pitched battles against superior forces. Horse archery dominated tactical thinking. Mongol warriors could shoot accurately while riding at full gallop. They used composite bows made from horn, wood, and sinew. These weapons had greater range and power than European bows. A skilled archer could hit targets at 200 yards. The feigned retreat was a favorite tactic. Mongol warriors would attack, then appear to flee in panic. Enemy forces would pursue, breaking their formation. Hidden reserves would then attack the scattered pursuers. This trick worked repeatedly because enemies never learned. Seasonal campaigns followed the grass cycle. Spring raids caught enemies weakened by winter. Summer allowed for longer expeditions. Autumn brought the final campaigns before winter. Winter was a time for rest, planning, and preparing weapons. Blood brotherhood created bonds stronger than family ties. Young warriors would mix their blood and swear eternal loyalty. These relationships crossed tribal boundaries. Sworn brothers were expected to die for each other. The custom created networks of alliance throughout the steppes. Sacred oaths held tremendous power. Breaking a sworn promise brought spiritual contamination. The guilty party faced rejection by their ancestors' spirits. This belief system enforced contracts and agreements. Honor mattered more than life itself. Oral traditions preserved tribal history and culture. Professional storytellers memorized epic poems about heroic ancestors. These tales taught proper behavior and tribal values. Children learned their identity through these stories. Each tribe maintained its unique version of steppe history. Shamanic practices varied between tribes but shared common elements. All recognized the power of Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Mountain spirits controlled weather and hunting success. River spirits governed fertility and abundance. Ancestral spirits guided and protected their descendants. The cult of the warrior dominated steppe culture. Young men gained status through displays of courage and skill. Cattle rustling served as a rite of passage. Successful raiders earned the right to marry and start their own families. Cowardice brought lifelong shame. Women held more freedom than in settled societies. They could own property and participate in trade. Some became powerful shamans or tribal leaders. However, they were also valuable prizes in raids. Kidnapping women was a common cause of warfare. Seasonal gatherings brought tribes together for trade and competition. These events featured horse races, archery contests, and wrestling matches. Young people met potential marriage partners. Shamans performed rituals for good fortune. These gatherings also served as informal diplomatic conferences. The justice system relied on compensation rather than punishment. Theft required repayment of multiple times the stolen value. Murder demanded blood money paid to the victim's family. Repeat offenders faced exile or death. The community enforced these judgments collectively. Economic life centered on pastoralism with limited agriculture. Some tribes practiced seasonal farming near rivers. They grew millet and barley using simple techniques. However, hunting and herding provided most subsistence. Trade supplemented local production with luxury goods and metal tools. Beyond the steppes lay wealthy civilizations that both tempted and threatened the nomadic tribes. These settled societies possessed riches the Mongols could barely imagine. They also commanded military technologies that could threaten nomadic independence. The Jin dynasty controlled northern China with impressive power. Founded by the Jurchen people, the Jin had conquered the previous Song dynasty. Their capital at Zhongdu, modern Beijing, housed over 1 million people. The city's walls stretched for miles and stood 60 feet high. Jin wealth came from agriculture and trade. Millions of peasants worked rice paddies and wheat fields. Artisans produced silk, porcelain, and metal goods prized throughout Asia. The Grand Canal transported goods between north and south. Taxes from this commerce filled the imperial treasury. The Jin military seemed formidable on paper. They maintained armies of hundreds of thousands. Chinese engineers had developed gunpowder weapons centuries earlier. Fire lances shot flames and projectiles. Primitive cannons could breach fortress walls. Crossbows provided infantry with powerful ranged weapons. However, the Jin faced serious military weaknesses. Their soldiers were recruited peasants with little fighting experience. Officers gained positions through political connections rather than military skill. The army focused on defense rather than aggressive campaigns. Corruption weakened military efficiency throughout the system. The Jin practiced tributary diplomacy with steppe peoples. They paid regular tribute to nomadic leaders in exchange for peace. This system had worked for centuries. Chinese gold and silk bought temporary alliances. However, it also revealed Chinese fear of nomadic military power. The Western Xia Kingdom controlled the corridor between China and Central Asia. This strategic position made them wealthy middlemen in Silk Road trade. Their capital at Xinging featured Buddhist monasteries and Confucian schools. The Tangut people who ruled Western Xia had adopted Chinese governmental systems. Western Jia military forces combined Chinese and nomadic elements. Infantry units used crossbows and siege equipment. Cavalry forces employed steppe tactics of mobility and archery. However, their army remained relatively small compared to the Jin dynasty. They relied on fortress cities for defense. Buddhist culture dominated Western Jia intellectual life. Monasteries served as centers of learning and manuscript copying. Scholars translated Buddhist texts from Sanskrit into local languages. Art and architecture reflected Buddhist themes and Chinese imperial styles. The Silk Road brought Western Xia into contact with diverse cultures. Merchants from India, Persia, and Europe passed through their territory. This exposure created a cosmopolitan atmosphere in major cities. However, it also made Western Xia dependent on trade revenue that could be disrupted by warfare. Far to the west lay the Khwarezmid Empire, stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. The Khwarezm Shahs had recently expanded their power throughout Central Asia. Their armies had conquered much of modern Iran, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan. Islamic civilization flourished under Khwarezmid rule. Great cities like Bukhara and Samarkand housed thousands of scholars, poets, and artisans. Madrasas taught Islamic law and theology. Libraries preserved Greek philosophical texts and Islamic scientific works. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge reached new heights. The Khwarezmid military combined Turkish nomadic traditions with Islamic administrative systems. The core army consisted of Turkish cavalry forces known as ghulams. These slave soldiers received intensive military training from childhood. Persian infantry units provided support and operated siege equipment. Trade made the Khwarezmid Empire incredibly wealthy. Caravans carrying Chinese silk passed through their territory. Persian merchants transported Indian spices and European goods. The Khwarezm Shahs taxed this commerce heavily. Gold and silver flowed into their treasuries. However, the Khwarezmid Empire suffered from internal instability. Recent expansion had created administrative challenges. Local governors operated with considerable independence. Religious minorities faced increasing persecution. The rapid growth had outpaced institutional development. To the northwest, Russian principalities presented a different kind of civilization. Orthodox Christianity dominated their culture and politics. Kiev served as the mother city of Russian civilization. However, political fragmentation weakened Russian unity and military effectiveness. Russian military forces relied heavily on infantry armed with spears and axes. Their cavalry was limited compared to steppe nomads. Stone fortifications protected major cities. However, the princes spent more time fighting each other than preparing for external threats. The Russian economy mixed agriculture with trade. Peasants worked the land under feudal obligations. Merchants transported goods along river routes connecting the Baltic and Black Seas. However, constant warfare disrupted economic development. Population remained sparse compared to Western Europe or China. Orthodox Christianity shaped Russian cultural identity. Magnificent churches dominated city skylines. Icons and religious art reflected Byzantine influences. Monasteries served as centers of learning and manuscript copying. However, religious differences created barriers to cooperation with Catholic Western Europe. These civilizations shared certain characteristics that made them vulnerable to nomadic attack. All relied on defensive strategies rather than aggressive expansion into the steppes. Their armies were designed for warfare against other sedentary states. None had developed effective tactics for fighting nomadic cavalry forces. Urban concentration created both strength and weakness. Cities housed populations that could support large armies and complex governments. However, they also presented tempting targets for nomadic raiders. The wealth of cities contrasted sharply with steppe poverty, creating powerful incentives for invasion. Technological advantages in metallurgy and engineering gave settled civilizations superior weapons and fortifications. However, They had become dependent on these advantages. When nomadic forces developed new tactics to overcome technological barriers, settled states found themselves defenseless. The stage was set for dramatic change. The fragmented tribes of Mongolia possessed military skills that could challenge any army. The wealthy civilization surrounding the steppes had grown complacent and militarily weak. A leader who could unite the nomadic tribes would face rich opportunities for conquest and expansion. All that was needed was the right person at the right moment. The child who would become Genghis Khan was about to enter this world of opportunity and danger. Into this world of fractured tribes and wealthy neighbours, a child was born who would change everything. The year was approximately 1162, though the nomads kept no precise calendars. The season was late spring, when the grass grew thick and the herds gave birth to their young. The secret history of the Mongols, written decades later, tells of supernatural signs surrounding this birth. The child emerged from his mother's womb, clutching a blood clot in his right fist. The clot was dark red and the size of a knucklebone used in games. The midwives gasped at this sight, for they had never seen such a thing. Shamans interpreted this omen with great excitement. Blood represented power and conquest in their spiritual understanding. A child born grasping blood would surely spill much blood in his lifetime. The shamans declared that Tengri, the eternal blue sky, had marked this infant for greatness. They predicted he would rule over many peoples and vast territories. The child's father was Yesuge Bahadur, a respected leader of the Borjigin clan within the greater Mongol tribe. Yesuge had earned his reputation through successful raids against enemy tribes. His name meant like 9, suggesting he possessed the strength of 9 ordinary men. The title Bahadur marked him as a proven warrior and leader. Yesuge's wife Hoelun had given birth to their first son under dramatic circumstances. She had originally been married to a Merkit warrior named Chiladu. Yesuge and his brothers had kidnapped her while she travelled with her husband. This act of bride-stealing was common practice among the tribes, though it created lasting enemies. The newborn received the name Temujin, honouring a recent military victory. Yesuge had just returned from a successful raid against the Tatars. During the battle, he had captured a prominent Tatar warrior named Temujin Uge. Naming his son after a defeated enemy was meant to transfer the enemy's strength to the child. Names carried profound meaning in Mongol culture. They were believed to shape a person's destiny and character. By giving his son the name of a captured Tatar, Yesuge hoped to ensure his child would triumph over the Mongols' traditional enemies. The name also suggested iron strength and unbreakable determination. The Borjigin clan traced their ancestry back to legendary figures. Their genealogies spoke of a mythical ancestor named Berta Chino, the blue-grey wolf. This wolf had mated with a beautiful doe named Koi Maral to produce the first Mongol leaders. Such stories connected the clan to supernatural forces and justified their claims to leadership. Even as an infant, Temujin displayed unusual characteristics. He rarely cried, even when hungry or uncomfortable. His eyes seemed to focus intently on faces and objects around him. The shamans noted these traits as further evidence of his special destiny. They performed protective rituals to ward off evil spirits who might be jealous of the child's promised future. Yesuge's position as a clan leader brought both privileges and responsibilities. He controlled the movement of several thousand people and their herds. His decisions about grazing territories and migration routes affected entire families. Success in these responsibilities required wisdom, courage, and the ability to inspire loyalty. The Borjigin clan had historical connections to earlier Mongol greatness. Some genealogies linked them to legendary Khans who had briefly united the steppes centuries before. These ancestral claims provided legitimacy for Yesuge's leadership and created expectations for his sons. Physical signs also marked Temujin as unusual. His birth weight was greater than normal, suggesting strength and vitality. His hair grew quickly and appeared darker than typical Mongol children. Some elders claimed they could see the shadow of a great eagle in his infant features. The timing of his birth coincided with favourable astronomical events. Certain stars appeared brighter than usual that spring. The shamans interpreted these celestial signs as confirmation of the child's special destiny. They advised Yasuge to raise his son with particular attention to military training and leadership development. Stories began spreading throughout the clan about the remarkable infant. Word of the blood clot and the shamanic prophecies travelled from tent to tent. Other clan leaders came to see this child who was supposedly destined for greatness. Some offered alliance marriages for their own daughters when the boy reached maturity. However, supernatural signs also brought dangers. Enemies might try to eliminate a child prophesied to become a great leader. Rival shamans from other tribes could attempt to curse the infant or disrupt his spiritual protection. Yasuge had to balance pride in his son's destiny with practical concerns for the child's safety. The birth also strengthened Yasuge's political position within the Mongol tribe. Having a son marked by divine favour increased his prestige among other clan leaders. It suggested that Tengri smiled upon the Borjigin and might grant them greater success in future endeavours. Temujin's earliest memories were shaped by the rhythms of nomadic life. His world consisted of felt-covered jers that could be packed and moved whenever the clan needed new pastures. The interior of his family's tent was divided into specific areas with their own purposes and significance. The fire pit occupied the centre of every jer. Here, dried dung burned continuously, providing heat and light. The smoke hole at the tent's peak allowed smoke to escape while letting in precious sunlight. Temujin learned early that the fire was sacred. Spilling water on it or stepping over it brought terrible bad luck. Daily life revolved around the care of animals. Horses were the most valuable possessions. Each family owned dozens of horses for different purposes. War horses were kept separate from riding horses. Breeding mares produced the fermented mare's milk called airag. Geldings served as pack animals and general transportation. Sheep provided wool, milk, and meat. Their thick wool was processed into felt for tent coverings and clothing. Goats produced similar products but were harder to manage. Cattle pulled the heavy carts loaded with family possessions during migrations. Camels were used for long trade expeditions across the desert. Children began learning survival skills as soon as they could walk. Temujin was placed on horseback before his 3rd birthday. His father tied him to the saddle so he couldn't fall. By age 4 he could ride without being secured. By 5 he could control his horse with just his knees, leaving his hands free for other tasks. Archery training started equally early. Mongol boys received their first bow around age 6. These were small weapons designed for children's strength. They practiced shooting at targets placed increasingly far away. The goal was to develop the muscle memory and eye coordination essential for mounted archery. The composite bow was a marvel of engineering. It was made from layers of horn, wood, and sinew glued together with fish bladder. When unstrung, it curved backward in the opposite direction from normal bows. This reverse curve stored tremendous energy, giving Mongol arrows greater range and penetrating power than other weapons. Temujin showed exceptional promise with the bow. His arrows flew straighter and farther than those of other children his age. He could hit moving targets while riding at full gallop. These skills impressed the clan's warriors and confirmed the shamanic prophecies about his future greatness. Wrestling was another essential skill. Mongol boys wrestled constantly, developing the strength and agility needed for combat. These contests taught them to read an opponent's movements and react instantly. Winners gained prestige among their peers. Losers learned valuable lessons about overcoming defeat. Tribal politics formed a constant backdrop to childhood education. Temujin listened as his father negotiated with other clan leaders. He observed alliance-making and witnessed the consequences of broken promises. These early lessons taught him that survival required both loyalty and suspicion. Blood feuds between clans created an atmosphere of perpetual tension. The Mongols were traditional enemies of the Tatars, who had killed many Borjigin warriors. The Merkits also harboured grievances against Yasuge's family because of Holun's kidnapping. These ancient hatreds would shape Temujin's future conflicts. Marriage alliances served to strengthen political relationships. When Temujin reached 9 years old, his father began negotiating a marriage contract with the Ongerat tribe. The proposed bride was Berthe, daughter of a respected leader named Dei Sechen. This alliance would benefit both clans through mutual support and shared resources. Shamanic beliefs permeated every aspect of daily life. The shamans served as intermediaries between the human world and the realm of spirits. They performed healing rituals, predicted the future, and provided spiritual protection. Temujin learned to respect their power while maintaining a practical outlook on their abilities. Tengri, the eternal blue sky, stood at the center of Mongol religious understanding. This supreme deity controlled weather, fortune, and the fate of nations. Smaller spirits inhabited mountains, rivers, and sacred groves. Ancestral spirits watched over their descendants and could provide guidance through dreams and omens. Seasonal ceremonies marked important transitions in the nomadic calendar. Spring rituals asked for successful births among the herds. Summer ceremonies honored the spirits of grass and water. Autumn rites sought protection during the dangerous winter months. These events brought the entire clan together in shared worship. Seasonal ceremonies marked important transitions in the nomadic calendar. Spring rituals asked for successful births among the herds. Summer ceremonies honored the spirits of grass and water. Autumn rites sought protection during the dangerous winter months. These events brought the entire clan together in shared worship. Gender roles in Mongol society differed from those in settled civilizations. Women enjoyed greater freedom and authority than their counterparts in China or Persia. They could own property, engage in trade, and influence political decisions. Some women became powerful shamans or even military leaders. Holan, Temujin's mother, exemplified the strength of Mongol women. She had survived kidnapping and adapted to life in a new clan. Her intelligence and determination impressed the other clan members. She played an active role in raising her children and advising her husband on important matters. Family structure emphasized collective responsibility. Older siblings helped care for younger ones. Extended family members shared resources and supported each other during difficulties. However, competition between brothers was also common, as each sought to prove his worth and secure his inheritance. Education was entirely practical. Children learned by watching adults and participating in daily tasks. There were no books or formal schools. Knowledge was transmitted through stories, songs, and hands-on experience. This system produced self-reliant individuals capable of surviving in harsh conditions. The oral tradition preserved Mongol history and cultural values. Professional storytellers memorized epic poems about heroic ancestors. These tales taught proper behavior and inspired young warriors. Temujin absorbed these stories and began dreaming of his own heroic future. When Temujin reached 9 years old, his father decided it was time to formalize the marriage arrangement with Bertha. The journey to the Ongerat camp would take several days across the steppes. Father and son set out together, leading spare horses and carrying gifts for the prospective bride's family. The negotiation with Dei Sechen proceeded smoothly. Both leaders saw advantages in linking their clans through marriage. Bertha was a year older than Temujin and already showed signs of becoming a beautiful and capable woman. The bride price was agreed upon, and Temujin was left with his future in-laws to begin learning their customs. Yesugei began his return journey alone, satisfied with the successful completion of the marriage negotiations. The alliance with the Ongerat would strengthen the Borjigin clan's position among the Mongols. His son's future seemed secure, and the shamanic prophecies about greatness appeared to be unfolding according to divine plan. On his way home, Yesugei encountered a group of Tatars holding a feast. These were not necessarily hostile encounters. Steppe custom demanded hospitality toward travelers, even traditional enemies. The Tatars invited him to share their food and drink, and refusing would have been considered insulting and cowardly. However, some of the Tatars recognized Yesugei from previous battles. They remembered his raids against their people and the warriors he had killed. Here was an opportunity for revenge that might never come again. They welcomed him warmly while secretly planning his death. The poison was likely added to his fermented mare's milk or mutton broth. Tatar shamans were skilled in the preparation of deadly substances extracted from plants and minerals. The poison was chosen to work slowly, allowing the victim to travel some distance before becoming seriously ill. This would make it difficult to trace the murder back to its perpetrators. Yesugei began feeling unwell the day after leaving the Tatar feast. His stomach cramped painfully, and he suffered from severe nausea. The poison coursed through his system, gradually shutting down his vital organs. He realized what had happened but was too far from help to save himself. With tremendous effort, he managed to reach his own clan's territory. His condition had deteriorated dramatically by this time. He could barely stay on his horse and had to stop frequently to rest. When he finally arrived at the Borjigin camp, he collapsed and called for his most trusted followers. Knowing he was dying, Yesugei gave his final instructions. He sent messengers to bring Temujin home immediately. The boy would need to assert his inheritance before rivals could claim leadership of the clan. He also ordered his followers to remain loyal to his family and protect them from enemies who might try to exploit his death. The messenger found Temujin at the Ongaret camp and delivered the urgent summons. The boy immediately began the journey home, but the distance was too great. By the time he arrived, his father was already dead. The clan had performed the funeral rites, and Yesugei's body had been placed on a platform to be consumed by birds and wild animals. The political consequences of Yesugei's death became apparent immediately. Several clan leaders who had accepted his authority began questioning whether they should follow a 9-year-old boy. They argued that the Borjigin needed mature leadership to face the challenges ahead. Temujin's youth made him appear weak and vulnerable. The most serious challenge came from Targutai, leader of the Taichud tribe. The Taichud were related to the Mongols but maintained independent leadership. Targutai had allied with Yesugei but saw no reason to continue supporting the Borjigin under a child's leadership. He began attracting Yesugei's former followers to his own banner. Within weeks of the funeral, most of the Borjigin clan supporters had abandoned them. Families packed their belongings and moved their herds to join other leaders. They took with them horses, cattle, and sheep that had been part of the collective clan property. Temujin watched helplessly as his inheritance disappeared. The family was left with almost nothing. Holun, Temujin, his brothers Kasar and Belgute, and his half-brothers from Yesugei's other wives found themselves alone on the steppes. They had a few horses, some sheep, and basic survival equipment. Everything else had been taken by departing clan members. This abandonment taught Temujin harsh lessons about human nature and tribal politics. Loyalty was conditional on strength and success. The shamanic prophecies meant nothing without the power to fulfill them. Survival required self-reliance and the ability to inspire others to follow. These lessons would shape his entire approach to leadership. Holun emerged as the family's strength during this crisis. She organized their reduced resources and planned for survival. She taught her children additional skills in hunting, fishing, and gathering wild foods. Her determination kept the family together when despair might have scattered them. The winter following Yesugei's death nearly killed them all. They had insufficient animals to provide meat and milk. Their felt tent was old and poorly insulated. Fuel for fires was scarce, and they often went days without adequate warmth. Several times, only successful hunting trips saved them from starvation. Temujin learned to hunt with desperateness born of necessity. He became skilled at catching fish with his bare hands and shooting birds with his bow. He learned to track animals through snow and identify edible plants. These skills would serve him well in future campaigns when supplies ran low. The experience also taught him about loyalty and betrayal. He observed which people had remained faithful to his family and which had abandoned them for personal advantage. He developed an ability to read character and judge who could be trusted. This knowledge would prove invaluable in his rise to power. Most importantly, the hardship forged an iron determination in Temujin's character. He vowed that he would never again be vulnerable to abandonment or betrayal. He would build power based on merit and proven loyalty, rather than traditional clan relationships. The weak boy left to die on the steppes would return as a leader capable of commanding absolute obedience. The shamanic prophecies had not been forgotten. If anything, the early hardships seemed to confirm that Tengri was testing the chosen child. Great leaders were forged in adversity, not born in comfort. The blood clot grasped at birth was beginning to fulfill its promise through suffering and determination. The seasons that followed Yasuge's death transformed Temujin from a privileged clan leader's son into a desperate survivor. The family's reduced circumstances forced them to learn skills that aristocratic Mongol children typically never needed. They became expert hunters, fishermen, and foragers out of absolute necessity. Holun taught her children to catch fish with their bare hands in the cold streams. She showed them which roots and berries were safe to eat during the harsh steppe winters. The boys learned to set snares for small game and to track larger animals through snow and across vast grasslands. Every skill meant the difference between life and death. Temujin developed exceptional abilities as a hunter. His archery skills, already impressive for his age, became deadly accurate through constant practice. He could bring down birds in flight and hit rabbits at full run. These hunting expeditions often lasted for days as he ranged farther from their meagre camp in search of game. The family's social isolation was as challenging as their poverty. Former allies avoided them, fearing association with the powerless would damage their own standing. Other clans viewed them as easy targets for raids. Temujin learned that in the harsh world of steppe politics, weakness invited aggression from all directions. During one particularly difficult winter, the family faced starvation when their few remaining animals died. Temujin and his brothers were forced to dig through snow to find frozen carcasses left by wolves. They scraped meat from bones and boiled leather for soup. This experience burned itself into Temujin's memory and strengthened his determination never to be helpless again. The Taichu tribe eventually decided to eliminate the potential threat posed by Yasuge's eldest son. They recognized that the boy might someday attempt to reclaim his father's position and seek revenge against those who had abandoned his family. Tagutai ordered his warriors to capture Temujin and bring him to their camp. The capture happened during a fishing expedition. Temujin had wandered far from his family's camp when Taichu'd warriors surrounded him. Despite his youth, he fought fiercely before being overwhelmed. They bound his hands with a wooden collar called a kangwe, which prevented him from using his arms effectively while allowing him to walk. Life as a prisoner taught Temujin valuable lessons about human nature. He observed how his captors treated him with casual cruelty mixed with occasional kindness. Some guards enjoyed tormenting the fallen aristocrat's son. Others showed sympathy and provided extra food or water when their commanders weren't watching. The Taichi'd planned to keep him prisoner until he was old enough to pose no threat. They moved him between different families within their camp, ensuring he couldn't develop dangerous relationships with potential rescuers. However, this strategy gave him intimate knowledge of their organization and military capabilities. His escape came during the spring festival when his guards were distracted by drinking and celebrating. Temujin slipped away from the camp and hid in a river, breathing through reeds while search parties passed overhead. A Taichud commoner named Sorgan Shira found him but chose to help rather than recapture him. This act of unexpected kindness from an enemy clan member reinforced Temujin's developing belief that individual character mattered more than tribal loyalty. The escape taught him the importance of building personal loyalty among people from all backgrounds. Sorgan Shira had helped him not because of clan obligations, but because he recognized something exceptional in the young prisoner. Temujin began to understand that leadership required inspiring devotion in individuals, not just commanding inherited followers. Upon returning to his family, Temujin found them in even worse condition than when he had left. However, his successful escape had begun to attract attention from other marginal figures on the steppes. Former slaves, outcasts from various tribes, and ambitious young warriors began seeking him out. His first significant follower was Boochu, the son of a wealthy herder. Boochu chose to abandon his comfortable life to follow Temujin, after witnessing his determination and natural leadership abilities. This decision demonstrated that Temujin possessed charismatic qualities that could attract voluntary followers despite his poverty. Another early ally was Gelme, a blacksmith's son who became one of Temujin's most trusted generals. Gelme's technical skills complemented Temujin's leadership abilities. He could repair weapons and equipment that other leaders took for granted. This partnership showed Temujin the value of incorporating specialists into his organization. During this period, Temujin reconnected with Jamuka, a childhood friend from a related clan. Jamuka had also experienced political difficulties but had managed to maintain more followers and resources. The two young men renewed their blood brotherhood and agreed to support each other's ambitions. The relationship with Jamuka initially provided mutual benefits. Jamuka's established position gave Temujin credibility and access to resources. Temujin's growing reputation for absolute loyalty and military skill attracted followers who strengthened Jamuka's coalition. However, both men harbored ambitions for supreme leadership that would eventually bring them into conflict. Temujin's approach to leadership began to differ fundamentally from traditional steppe practices. Instead of relying on aristocratic birth or inherited clan loyalty, he promoted followers based on demonstrated ability and unwavering personal devotion. This meritocratic principle attracted talented individuals from all social backgrounds. He also developed a reputation for keeping his word under all circumstances. While other leaders made promises they later broke when convenient, Temujin's commitments were absolute. This reliability became his most valuable political asset, distinguishing him from rivals who governed through fear or traditional authority. Temujin's rise from outcast to leader required powerful allies beyond his growing band of devoted followers. The most important of these alliances was with Togrul Khan, leader of the Kurate tribe. This relationship would provide Temujin with the military backing needed to begin serious campaigns for power. Togrul had been a friend and ally of Yasuge during their younger years. The two leaders had supported each other through various conflicts and had even sworn brotherhood oaths. When Temujin approached him for help, Togrul agreed partly from loyalty to his dead friend's memory and partly from recognition of the young man's potential. The relationship developed into something resembling that between father and son. Togrul provided military support for Temujin's early campaigns, while teaching him diplomacy and statecraft. Temujin learned how to manage complex alliances, conduct negotiations, and balance competing interests within a large coalition. Togrul's support was crucial for Temujin's first major political achievement, his marriage to Berthe. The wedding had been arranged years earlier by Yasuge, but Temujin's subsequent poverty had complicated the agreement. With Karate backing, he was able to present himself as a worthy husband despite his reduced circumstances. The marriage ceremony took place in the traditional Mongol fashion. Both families contributed animals for the feast, and shamans performed rituals ensuring divine blessing on the union. Bertha brought with her a substantial dowry that significantly improved Temujin's material position. More importantly, the marriage created lasting ties with the powerful Ongurat tribe. Bert proved to be an ideal partner for an ambitious young leader. She possessed intelligence, strength, and political wisdom that complemented Temujin's military talents. Unlike many aristocratic women who remained sheltered within their families, Bert participated actively in her husband's political discussions and military planning. The happiness of the newlywed period was shattered when Merkit raiders kidnapped Bertha in revenge for Holand's earlier abduction by Yasuge. This attack struck at Temujin's deepest emotional attachments, while challenging his reputation as a leader capable of protecting his followers. The rescue of his wife became both a personal crusade and a political necessity. Temujin assembled a coalition of 8,000 warriors for the rescue mission. Togrul provided the largest contingent of troops, while Jamuka contributed his own followers. The assault on the Merkit camp demonstrated Temujin's tactical brilliance. Instead of a direct frontal attack, he divided his forces and struck from multiple directions simultaneously. This coordination required precise timing and communication between separate army groups. The surprise attack scattered the Merkit forces and rescued Bertha along with hundreds of other captives. The successful campaign enhanced Temujin's reputation throughout the steppes. Stories spread of the young leader who had assembled a massive army to rescue his wife. His willingness to risk everything for personal loyalty impressed warriors who valued courage above all other qualities. The victory also demonstrated his ability to coordinate complex military operations. However, the rescue had lasting consequences that would complicate Temujin's future. Berta had been pregnant when captured, and gave birth to a son named Jochi shortly after her rescue. Questions about the child's paternity would plague the family for years, creating succession disputes that weakened Mongol unity even after Temujin's death. The campaign also revealed tensions within the coalition that had rescued Berta. Jamuka had expected to lead the combined army as the senior partner in his blood brotherhood with Temujin. However, many warriors had looked to Temujin for actual leadership during the fighting. This shift in allegiance created jealousy that would eventually destroy their friendship. Following the Merkit campaign, Temujin began developing the tactical innovations that would revolutionize steppe warfare. He experimented with new formations that maximized the effectiveness of mounted archers. His forces practiced coordinated movements that allowed them to concentrate overwhelming force at decisive points while maintaining mobility. Psychological warfare became another hallmark of Temujin's military approach. He deliberately cultivated a reputation for showing mercy to enemies who surrendered immediately while utterly destroying those who resisted. This policy encouraged quick surrenders while demonstrating the futility of opposing his forces. Intelligence gathering received unprecedented attention in Temujin's organization. He recruited spies from among merchants, herdsmen, and even enemy clan members. This network provided detailed information about enemy movements, resources, and internal divisions. Superior intelligence allowed his forces to attack when enemies were weakest, and avoid engagements when conditions were unfavorable. His treatment of defeated enemies also differed from traditional steppe practices. Instead of simply taking plunder and leaving, Temujin incorporated useful individuals into his own organization. Skilled craftsmen, experienced warriors, and knowledgeable administrators were offered positions based on their abilities rather than their tribal origins. The reputation of Temujin who never breaks his word began spreading throughout the Mongol territories. Unlike other leaders who made promises they later ignored, Temujin's commitments were absolute. Warriors who joined him knew they would be rewarded for loyalty and punished for betrayal, but they also knew his promises could be trusted completely. This reliability attracted followers from many different tribes and social backgrounds. Former slaves served alongside aristocratic warriors in his growing army. Shamans from various traditions provided spiritual guidance without religious conflict. The diversity of his followers reflected Temujin's emerging vision of leadership based on merit rather than birth. The success of the Merkit campaign marked the beginning of Temujin's rise to supreme power among the Mongol tribes. However, this ascent brought him into direct conflict with his former blood brother Jamuka, who also harbored ambitions for leadership. The rivalry between these two charismatic leaders would define Mongol politics for the next decade. The break between Temujin and Jamuka developed gradually through a series of incidents that revealed their fundamental differences in leadership philosophy. Jamuka represented the traditional aristocratic approach to steppe politics, relying on inherited status and clan relationships. Temujin offered something new, advancement based on proven ability and absolute personal loyalty. The final rupture came when followers from both camps began choosing sides based on which leader they preferred to serve. Many of Jamuka's traditional allies defected to Temujin, attracted by his reputation for reliability and his willingness to promote talented individuals regardless of their background. This mass defection enraged Jamuka and made reconciliation impossible. Hey, welcome to Natural Reader's AI voice generator, our only application built to assist creators and companies alike with commercial license voiceover audio. Jamuka struck first, assembling a coalition of tribes who feared Temujin's growing influence. He proclaimed himself Gur Khan, a title claiming supremacy over all Mongol peoples. His army included traditional enemies of the Borjigin clan, along with recent converts to his cause. The force numbered approximately 30,000 warriors making it the largest steppe army assembled in generations. The Battle of Dalan Baljut in 1187 tested Temujin's military leadership against a numerically superior enemy. Despite his tactical innovations and loyal followers, his 13,000 warriors could not overcome Yamuka's overwhelming numerical advantage. The battle ended in Temujin's tactical defeat and temporary retreat to the margins of Mongol territory. However, the defeat taught valuable strategic lessons that shaped Temujin's future campaigns. He realized that superior numbers could overwhelm tactical brilliance if not properly countered. This led him to develop new approaches to battlefield coordination and military organization that would prove decisive in later conflicts. The retreat also tested the loyalty of Temujin's followers. Many leaders would have lost most of their army after such a significant defeat. Instead, Temujin's core supporters remained with him through the difficult period that followed. This loyalty reflected the personal bonds he had built with individual followers, rather than relying on traditional clan obligations. During his temporary exile, Temujin implemented revolutionary changes to military organization. He adopted the decimal system, organizing his forces into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors. This structure provided clear command relationships and allowed for more effective coordination during complex operations. The decimal system also broke traditional tribal and clan affiliations within the army. Warriors from different tribes served together in the same units, developing loyalty to their immediate commanders and the overall organization rather than their birth families. This innovation would prove crucial for maintaining unity in the diverse empire that followed. Temujin's approach to integrating defeated enemies represented another departure from steppe tradition. Instead of enslaving or executing captured warriors, he offered them positions within his own forces based on their demonstrated abilities. This policy attracted defectors from enemy armies and gradually expanded his military strength. His religious tolerance also distinguished him from other steppe leaders. While maintaining his own shamanic beliefs, Temujin consulted spiritual advisors from various traditions, including Nestorian Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims. This openness attracted followers from diverse backgrounds and demonstrated his pragmatic approach to leadership. The period of exile ended when Temujin's growing reputation began attracting new allies. The Kreite leader Togrul renewed his support, providing military backing for Temujin's return to active campaigning. Other tribes began approaching him directly, offering alliance in exchange for protection from common enemies. Temujin's return to prominence was marked by a series of carefully planned campaigns that demonstrated his evolved military capabilities. He avoided direct confrontation with Jamuka's main force, instead targeting isolated enemy groups that could be defeated in detail. These victories gradually shifted the balance of power in his favor. The integration of new tactical concepts revolutionized Mongol warfare under Temujin's leadership. His forces practiced coordinated movements that allowed them to concentrate overwhelming force at decisive points, while maintaining the mobility that was essential for steppe warfare. These techniques would later prove devastatingly effective against sedentary armies. Psychological warfare became increasingly sophisticated in Temujin's campaigns. He deliberately cultivated different reputations for different purposes: absolute reliability for potential allies, terrible vengeance for oath-breakers, and unexpected mercy for enemies who surrendered immediately. This complex approach to reputation management gave him diplomatic options that other leaders lacked. The growing efficiency of his intelligence network provided Temujin with unprecedented strategic advantages. His spies operated throughout Mongol territory, providing detailed information about enemy movements, internal divisions, and potential defectors. This intelligence allowed him to time his campaigns for maximum effectiveness while avoiding unnecessary risks. By the mid-1190s, Temujin had recovered from his earlier defeat and emerged as the dominant figure in Mongol politics. His combination of military innovation, diplomatic skill, and inspirational leadership had attracted followers from across the steppes. The stage was set for the final campaigns that would establish his supremacy over all Mongol tribes. The path to supreme leadership required Temujin to defeat or absorb all rival power centers among the Mongol peoples. These final campaigns would test every aspect of his military and political abilities while determining whether his vision of unified nomadic power could become reality. The Merkits remained his most personal enemies, having kidnapped Berta and threatened his family's survival. Their defeat represented both strategic necessity and emotional satisfaction. Temujin's campaign against them was methodical and ruthless, designed to eliminate them as a political force forever. The Merkit War demonstrated the effectiveness of Temujin's evolved military system. His forces moved with unprecedented coordination, striking multiple Merkit camps simultaneously, while preventing their scattered groups from reuniting. The campaign combined traditional steppe mobility with new levels of strategic planning and tactical execution. Captured Merkit warriors faced Temujin's standardized policy for defeated enemies. Those who had personally wronged his family were executed, but ordinary warriors were offered integration into his army. This selective mercy eliminated irreconcilable opponents while adding useful manpower to his growing forces. The conquest of the Tatars posed different challenges. These traditional enemies of all Mongol tribes had collaborated with the Jin dynasty against steppe unity. Their defeat was essential for Mongol independence, but their complete destruction would eliminate potential supporters within his own coalition. Temujin's solution was systematic and brutal. He ordered the execution of all Tatar males taller than a cartwheel, effectively eliminating the entire adult male population. Women and children were distributed among Mongol families for integration. This genocide removed the Tatar threat permanently, while providing additional population for the growing Mongol Confederation. The campaign against Togrul Khan represented Temujin's most difficult personal decision. The Karaite leader had served as his surrogate father and primary ally during his rise to power. However, Togrul's growing fear of his protégé's success led him to betray their alliance and join with Jamuka against him. The war with the Karaites tested Temujin's intelligence network and diplomatic skills. He learned of Togrul's planned betrayal through spies within the Karaite camp, allowing him to strike first rather than be caught unprepared. The campaign required careful coordination to prevent Togrul from escaping to seek refuge with other enemies. The decisive battle occurred at night when Temujin's forces surprised the Karaite camp. The attack demonstrated the sophistication of Mongol military organization under his leadership. Different units executed coordinated movements in darkness, overwhelming the defenders before they could mount effective resistance. Togrul's death ended Temujin's last major alliance with an established steppe leader. From this point forward, he would rely entirely on followers who owed their positions to his personal favor rather than traditional tribal authority. This marked his complete transition from coalition leader to supreme ruler. The final confrontation with Jamuka required the most careful preparation. His former blood brother remained a charismatic leader with significant following among traditionalist Mongol clans. Their conflict represented competing visions for the future of steppe civilization. Jamuka's support gradually eroded as Temujin's victories demonstrated the effectiveness of his new approach to military and political organization. Defectors brought detailed intelligence about Jamuka's remaining forces and their defensive plans. These intelligence advantages allowed Temujin to plan the final campaign with unprecedented precision. The last battle between the former blood brothers ended with Jamuka's complete defeat and capture. However, their confrontation continued through negotiation, as each man articulated his vision for Mongol leadership. Jamuka represented the old system of clan-based authority, while Temujin offered meritocratic advancement under centralized leadership. Jamuka's execution was carried out according to his own wishes, without spilling blood on the ground in recognition of their former brotherhood. His death eliminated the last significant opposition to Temujin's supreme authority over the Mongol peoples. The way was now clear for the establishment of a unified nomadic empire. The systematic defeat of all rival leaders left Temujin as the undisputed master of the Mongol steppes. His coalition included survivors from all the major tribes, united under his personal authority rather than traditional clan structures. This represented a fundamental transformation of steppe political organization. The integration of defeated populations required careful management to prevent internal conflict. Temujin's decimal military organization mixed warriors from different tribal backgrounds, creating new loyalties that transcended traditional divisions. Marriages between members of formerly hostile groups strengthened these political bonds. Religious and cultural integration proceeded alongside political unification. Shamans from various traditions served Temujin's administration, while his policy of religious tolerance prevented sectarian conflicts that might have weakened Mongol unity. This pluralistic approach would become a hallmark of his later empire. The preparation for proclamation as supreme ruler involved extensive consultation with representatives from all Mongol groups. This process ensured that his elevation would be seen as legitimate by traditionalists, while establishing precedents for his absolute authority over all aspects of Mongol society. The spring of 1206 witnessed an unprecedented gathering on the Mongol steppes. Representatives from every tribe, clan, and subdivision of the Mongol peoples assembled near the source of the Onon River to participate in the greatest Kurultai in their history. This assembly would transform Temujin from tribal leader into the founder of world history's largest contiguous land empire. The location itself held sacred significance for the Mongol people. The Onon River was considered one of the sources of their tribal strength, and shamanic traditions associated the area with divine blessing. By choosing this site, Temujin emphasized the spiritual importance of the gathering, while demonstrating his control over territories sacred to all Mongol groups. Preparations for the Kurultai required months of careful organization. Temujin's administrators coordinated the movement of tens of thousands of people and their herds across vast distances. Supplies of food, felt for shelter, and ceremonial materials had to be transported to the remote assembly site. This logistical achievement demonstrated the efficiency of the emerging Mongol state. The assembly opened with traditional shamanic ceremonies invoking the blessing of Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Priests from various tribal traditions participated in these rituals, symbolizing the religious unity that Temujin had fostered throughout his rise to power. The ceremonies also included offerings to ancestral spirits and prayers for divine favor on the proceedings. Delegates from each tribal group formally acknowledged Temujin's supremacy through traditional oath-taking ceremonies. These rituals involved the sharing of blood, the breaking of arrows to symbolize submission, and elaborate verbal pledges of eternal loyalty. The uniformity of these ceremonies across diverse tribal traditions demonstrated Temujin's success in creating shared political culture. The formal proclamation of Temujin as Genghis Khan marked the climactic moment of the assembly. The title, Genghis, derived from the Mongol word Chingiz, meaning universal or oceanic. By accepting this title, he claimed authority not just over the Mongol peoples but over all nations and territories that might be conquered in the future. The investiture ceremony combined traditional Mongol customs with innovations that emphasized the unprecedented nature of his authority. A white felt carpet was spread beneath Genghis Khan's feet, symbolizing the purity of his rule. Representatives from each tribal group lifted him toward the sky, demonstrating their collective support for his elevation. The establishment of the Yasa, the Mongol legal code, represented one of the Kurultai's most significant achievements. This comprehensive law system governed everything from military discipline to commercial transactions. The Yasa's provisions would remain binding throughout the Mongol Empire's existence, providing legal unity across diverse populations and territories. Military reorganization received detailed attention during the assembly. The decimal system was formally codified, with specific commanders appointed to lead units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors. These appointments were based entirely on demonstrated ability and loyalty, rather than traditional tribal or aristocratic status. The creation of the Imperial Guard, known as the Keshik, established Genghis Khan's personal military force. This elite unit of 10,000 warriors was recruited from the sons and brothers of his most trusted commanders. The Keshik served both as his bodyguard and as a training ground for future military leaders throughout the empire. Genghis Khan's appointment of his most capable generals to senior positions demonstrated his commitment to meritocratic leadership. Subutai, a blacksmith's son who had proven his brilliance in reconnaissance and strategy, received command of major military operations. Jebi, nicknamed the Arrow for his marksmanship, was appointed to lead advance forces in future campaigns. The Kurultai also addressed the administrative challenges of governing the newly unified Mongol Confederation. Chinese and Muslim advisors were formally integrated into the governmental structure, bringing literacy and bureaucratic skills that the nomadic Mongols lacked. This represented the beginning of the empire's policy of incorporating useful talents from all cultural backgrounds. Economic policies established during the Kurultai laid the foundation for the empire's commercial success. Trade protection was guaranteed for merchants travelling through Mongol territories. Standardized weights and measures were established to facilitate commerce. These policies would eventually revitalize the Silk Road and create unprecedented prosperity across Eurasia. Religious tolerance was formally proclaimed as official policy. Shamans, Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, and practitioners of other faiths received equal protection and the right to practice their beliefs freely. This policy served both practical purposes by preventing religious conflicts and philosophical goals by demonstrating Mongol openness to diverse forms of wisdom. The Kurultai concluded with extensive planning for future military campaigns. Intelligence reports about neighbouring civilizations were presented and analysed. Detailed discussions covered the relative advantages of expanding east toward China, west toward Central Asia, or south toward the civilized kingdoms that bordered the steppes. Genghis Khan's closing address to the assembly articulated his vision for the newly created empire. He spoke of Mongol destiny to rule all peoples under the eternal blue sky. This vision combined traditional shamanic concepts with unprecedented ambitions for world conquest. The speech inspired his followers while establishing ideological justification for the campaigns that would follow. The Great Kurultai of 1206 had transformed not only Temujin's status, but the entire nature of steppe civilization. For the first time in history, all Mongol peoples were united under single leadership. This achievement created the foundation for military campaigns that would reshape the political geography of Eurasia and establish the largest land empire in human history. The proclamation of Genghis Khan marked not just a political transformation, but a fundamental revolution in military organization and tactics. The unified Mongol forces represented innovations that would prove devastatingly effective against every type of enemy they encountered during the subsequent campaigns of conquest. The foundation of Mongol military superiority lay in their unprecedented mobility. Each warrior maintained a string of 4 or 5 horses, allowing them to travel vast distances without exhausting their mounts. This system meant that Mongol armies could cover up to 100 miles per day, a speed that no contemporary force could match or even imagine possible. The composite bow remained the primary weapon of Mongol warriors, but its effectiveness was maximized through systematic training and tactical innovation. These weapons were constructed from layers of horn, wood, and sinew, creating tremendous stored energy when drawn. A skilled archer could accurately hit targets at distances exceeding 300 yards. Mongol horse archery represented the pinnacle of mounted warfare development. Warriors could shoot accurately in any direction while riding at full gallop. They practiced shooting techniques that allowed them to loose arrows rapidly while maintaining accuracy. The average Mongol warrior could fire 12 arrows per minute from horseback. The tactical flexibility of Mongol forces derived from their decimal organization and standardized training. Units could separate and reunite according to battlefield conditions without losing coordination. Commanders communicated through flag signals and horn calls that allowed complex maneuvers to be executed across vast battlefields. The feigned retreat became Mongol warfare's signature tactic. Entire armies would appear to flee in panic, drawing enemy forces out of defensive positions and into vulnerable pursuit formations. Hidden reserves would then attack the scattered pursuers from multiple directions, turning apparent defeat into decisive victory. Mangudai, or suicide troops, specialized in these deception operations. These elite units would charge enemy positions, engage briefly, then retreat while maintaining the appearance of genuine panic. Their performance had to be convincing enough to draw enemies into pursuit while avoiding actual destruction of the unit. Psychological warfare received systematic development under Genghis Khan's leadership. Mongol armies deliberately cultivated reputations for invincibility and terrible vengeance against those who resisted. Stories of Mongol ruthlessness spread faster than their armies, often causing enemies to surrender without fighting rather than face certain destruction. Intelligence networks provided Mongol commanders with unprecedented strategic advantages. Merchants, travelers, and deliberate spies gathered detailed information about enemy territories, military capabilities, and internal divisions. This intelligence was systematically analyzed and used to plan campaigns that struck when enemies were weakest. The Mongol postal system, known as the Yam, was originally developed to support military communications. Relay stations spaced a day's ride apart allowed messages to travel across vast distances at speeds no other civilization could match. This system enabled coordination of military operations across multiple theaters simultaneously. Siege warfare techniques were acquired and improved through contact with Chinese and Muslim military engineers. Mongols learned to construct catapults, siege towers, and other equipment needed to assault fortified cities. They also developed tactics for coordinating traditional nomadic mobility with the requirements of prolonged sieges. The integration of foreign specialists enhanced Mongol military capabilities in areas where nomadic traditions were inadequate. Chinese engineers provided expertise in siege warfare and fortification. Muslim administrators contributed knowledge of logistics and supply management. Persian craftsmen produced specialized weapons and equipment. Adaptability to different types of warfare allowed Mongol forces to succeed in environments ranging from open steppes to dense forests to urban areas. They modified their tactics and equipment based on terrain and enemy capabilities, while maintaining their core advantages in mobility and coordination. The Mongol military system emphasized merit-based promotion regardless of social background or tribal origin. Talented individuals from conquered peoples could rise to high command positions through demonstrated ability and loyalty. This policy attracted capable leaders while ensuring that the most skilled commanders directed military operations. Standard operating procedures were developed for common military situations. Scouts followed established patterns for reconnaissance missions. Siege operations followed systematic approaches that maximized efficiency. Retreat and reorganization procedures allowed defeated forces to regroup and return to combat quickly. Terror tactics were employed systematically to minimize actual fighting, by convincing enemies that resistance was futile. Cities that surrendered immediately received lenient treatment, while those that resisted faced complete destruction. This policy encouraged rapid surrender and reduced Mongol casualties in subsequent campaigns. The immediate aftermath of the 1206 Kurultai required Genghis Khan to demonstrate the effectiveness of his newly unified forces. Several independent tribes and small kingdoms on the periphery of Mongol territory provided opportunities to test military innovations while consolidating control over the steppes. The Naiman Confederacy represented the most significant remaining opposition to complete Mongol unity. These Western tribes had maintained independence through superior organization and access to foreign military technology. Their defeat would eliminate the last major rival to Genghis Khan's authority over the nomadic peoples. The campaign against the Naimans demonstrated the effectiveness of Mongol intelligence gathering and strategic planning. Spies provided detailed information about Naiman military preparations and internal political divisions. This intelligence allowed Genghis Khan to time his attack when enemy forces were scattered and unprepared. The decisive battle occurred when Mongol forces surrounded the main Naiman army in a valley where their superior numbers provided no advantage. Coordinated attacks from multiple directions prevented effective resistance, while demonstrating the tactical superiority of the decimal organization system. The Naiman defeat completed Mongol control over the central steppes. Forest peoples to the north presented different military challenges that tested Mongol adaptability. These tribes relied on guerrilla warfare in dense woodlands, where traditional cavalry tactics were ineffective. Genghis Khan's forces developed new techniques for fighting in forests while maintaining their mobility advantages. The conquest of the forest peoples expanded Mongol territory into regions with different resources and strategic importance. These areas provided timber for construction projects and furs for trade with sedentary civilizations. Control of northern territories also secured Mongol rear areas against potential threats during southern campaigns. Early raids into Jin dynasty territory served multiple purposes beyond simple plunder. These expeditions tested Chinese military responses while gathering intelligence about their defensive capabilities. Mongol commanders learned about Chinese weapons, tactics, and the political situation within the Jin Empire. The first Chinese campaigns revealed both opportunities and challenges that would shape future military strategy. Chinese armies proved vulnerable to Mongol mobility and superior leadership, but their fortified cities presented obstacles that required new tactical approaches. These lessons influenced the development of siege warfare capabilities. Genghis Khan's establishment of Karakorum as his capital city represented a fundamental shift in nomadic political organization. For the first time, the Mongols possessed a permanent administrative center that could coordinate activities across their expanding territories. The city became the focal point for diplomatic and commercial activities. The construction of Karakorum required resources and skills that traditional nomadic society could not provide. Foreign craftsmen were recruited to design and build permanent structures. Administrative officials from sedentary civilizations established bureaucratic systems necessary for governing an expanding empire. The integration of diverse populations within Mongol territories required careful management to prevent internal conflicts. Genghis Khan's policies emphasized religious tolerance and meritocratic advancement as mechanisms for maintaining unity among peoples with different cultural backgrounds and traditions. Chinese and Muslim advisors played crucial roles in developing administrative systems capable of governing both nomadic and sedentary populations. These specialists provided literacy skills, legal knowledge, and bureaucratic experience that complemented Mongol military capabilities. Their integration marked the beginning of the empire's multicultural character. Commercial policies established during this period laid the foundation for the economic prosperity that would characterize the Mongol Empire. Trade protection was guaranteed for merchants traveling through Mongol territories. Standardized weights and measures facilitated commerce between different regions and cultural groups. The revival of Silk Road trade routes brought immediate benefits to Mongol territories. Taxes on commercial activities provided revenue for military campaigns and administrative expenses. Cultural exchange through trade introduced new technologies and ideas that enhanced Mongol capabilities in various fields. Religious tolerance continued to serve both practical and ideological purposes. The policy prevented conflicts between different faith communities while demonstrating Mongol openness to wisdom from all sources. This approach attracted voluntary submission from religious minorities in neighboring civilizations. Preparation for major campaigns required systematic organization of resources and personnel. Food supplies had to be accumulated for armies that would operate far from Mongol-based territories. Weapons and equipment needed to be produced in quantities sufficient for operations involving hundreds of thousands of warriors. The development of supply systems marked another innovation in nomadic military organization. Traditional steppe warfare relied on mobility and living off the land during short campaigns. The scale of Genghis Khan's ambitions required logistical capabilities that could support extended operations across vast distances. Intelligence-gathering networks were expanded to cover potential targets throughout China, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe. Merchants, diplomats, and deliberate spies provided information about political conditions, military capabilities, and economic resources that would influence campaign planning. By 1211, Genghis Khan had completed the consolidation of Mongol power and prepared his forces for the great campaigns that would establish his empire as a world power. The foundations were in place for military operations that would reshape the political map of Eurasia and create the largest contiguous land empire in human history. With the steppes unified under his authority, Genghis Khan turned his gaze toward the wealthy civilizations that bordered Mongol territory. The richest and most tempting target was the Jin dynasty, which controlled northern China and commanded resources that dwarfed anything the nomadic peoples possessed. The decision to invade China stemmed from multiple motivations that went beyond simple desire for plunder. The Jin dynasty represented everything that had historically threatened nomadic independence. Their wealth came from the labor of millions of peasants working fertile agricultural lands. Their cities housed populations larger than entire Mongol tribes. Personal revenge also motivated Genghis Khan's decision. The Jin had historically played different nomadic groups against each other, providing support to the Tatars and other enemies of the Mongols. They had contributed to the political fragmentation that had weakened the steppes for generations. The time had come to settle these old scores. The Jin tributary system embodied the condescending attitude that Chinese dynasties maintained toward nomadic peoples. They expected barbarian leaders to journey to their capital, perform humiliating submission ceremonies, and accept symbolic gifts as rewards for acknowledging Chinese superiority. This system had worked for centuries because divided nomadic groups had no alternative. When Jin officials demanded that Genghis Khan present himself for the traditional submission ceremony, his response became legendary. He turned toward the south, spat contemptuously, and declared that he would never bow before the Jin emperor. This gesture signaled his complete rejection of the tributary relationship and his intention to meet the Chinese as equals through warfare. The intelligence gathering that preceded the invasion revealed both opportunities and challenges that would shape Mongol strategy. Chinese defectors provided detailed information about Jin military organization, defensive preparations, and internal political divisions. These sources painted a picture of an empire grown wealthy but militarily complacent. The scale of the proposed undertaking required unprecedented preparation and coordination. China possessed a population of over 50 million people compared to perhaps 2 million Mongols. Chinese armies numbered in the hundreds of thousands and possessed sophisticated weapons and fortifications. The economic resources available to the Jin dynasty exceeded anything in the nomadic world. However, intelligence reports also revealed critical weaknesses in Chinese military organization. The Jin army consisted largely of reluctant peasant conscripts, led by officers who had gained position through political connections rather than military ability. Corruption weakened the efficiency of their supply systems and defensive preparations. The fundamental differences between nomadic and sedentary warfare presented both obstacles and opportunities. Chinese forces were designed for defensive operations and battles against other sedentary armies. They had little experience fighting highly mobile cavalry forces that could appear anywhere along their extended borders. Chinese fortifications represented the most serious challenge facing Mongol invasion plans. Cities surrounded by massive walls could not be taken by traditional nomadic tactics of rapid assault. Siege warfare required specialized equipment, extended time commitments, and supply systems that nomadic armies had never developed. The Mongol advantages lay in mobility, superior leadership, and unified command structure. Chinese forces were scattered across vast territories and operated under divided command authority. Regional governors often competed with each other, rather than cooperating against external threats. Psychological factors also favored the Mongol invasion. Chinese military confidence was based on their technological advantages and historical success against divided nomadic groups. They had never faced a unified steppe confederation led by commanders of exceptional ability and determination. The timing of the invasion coincided with internal problems within the Jin dynasty. Succession disputes weakened central authority, while natural disasters strained government resources. These conditions created opportunities for external attack, while reducing Chinese capacity for effective resistance. Economic motivations became increasingly important as Genghis Khan understood the potential rewards of successful conquest. Chinese wealth included not just gold and silver, but also silk production, advanced metallurgy, and sophisticated manufacturing capabilities. Control of Chinese resources would transform the Mongol Confederation into a world power. The strategic implications of Chinese conquest extended far beyond immediate material gains. Success against the Jin dynasty would demonstrate Mongol capability to defeat any enemy, regardless of technological advantages or defensive preparations. This reputation would facilitate future conquest throughout Eurasia. Religious and cultural considerations also influenced the decision to invade China. The Mongol shamanic worldview interpreted their recent military successes as evidence of divine favor. Tengri appeared to be blessing their expansion, and refusing to pursue obvious opportunities might anger the spirits. Chinese military technology offered potential advantages for future Mongol campaigns. Siege engines, gunpowder weapons, and advanced metallurgy could be acquired through conquest and integrated into nomadic warfare. Chinese engineers and craftsmen could be recruited to serve Mongol military purposes. The final decision to invade required extensive consultation with senior commanders and tribal leaders. This process ensured unified support for the massive undertaking, while allowing experienced warriors to contribute their expertise to strategic planning. The consensus was clear. The time had come to test Mongol strength against the greatest challenge they had ever faced. The invasion of China began in 1211 with Genghis Khan leading an army of approximately 100,000 warriors across the Gobi Desert. This harsh journey tested Mongol logistics and organization before they even encountered Chinese resistance. The desert crossing required precise coordination of water supplies and careful management of horse herds. The Gobi presented challenges that exceeded even the harsh conditions of normal steppe life. Water sources were sparse and often separated by days of travel across barren terrain. The Mongols solved this problem by carrying water in leather bags and by organizing their march around known oases and wells. Sandstorms posed another danger during the desert crossing. These weather events could separate army units and cause warriors to become lost in the trackless wastes. Mongol commanders developed navigation techniques using stars and wind patterns to maintain direction during adverse conditions. The logistics of feeding such a large army during the crossing required innovative solutions. Traditional nomadic practice relied on hunting and dairy products from herds, but the desert provided little game and limited grazing for animals. The Mongols carried dried meat and fermented mare's milk to supplement what they could obtain locally. Chinese border defences proved inadequate against the Mongol invasion. The Great Wall fortifications were designed to channel attackers toward defended passes where superior numbers could be brought to bear. However, Mongol mobility allowed them to bypass many defensive positions and strike where resistance was weakest. The first major engagement occurred at the Juyong Pass, where Chinese forces attempted to block the Mongol advance toward Beijing. The battle demonstrated both Mongol tactical superiority and Chinese military weaknesses. Traditional Mongol feint attacks drew Chinese forces into vulnerable positions where they were destroyed by concentrated archery. Siege warfare presented the greatest challenge to traditional Mongol military methods. Chinese cities were protected by walls that could not be breached by cavalry charges or archery attacks. The Mongols had to develop new techniques and acquire specialized equipment to assault fortified positions effectively. Chinese military engineers who defected to the Mongol army provided crucial expertise in siege warfare. These specialists taught nomadic warriors how to construct catapults, siege towers, and other equipment needed to assault city walls. They also shared knowledge about Chinese defensive techniques and vulnerabilities. The Siege of Datong marked the first major test of Mongol siege capabilities. The city's massive walls and determined garrison required a methodical approach that differed completely from traditional nomadic warfare. Mongol forces surrounded the city and constructed siege equipment, while maintaining cavalry forces to prevent relief attempts. The fall of Datong after several months of siege established patterns that would characterize the entire Chinese campaign. Cities that surrendered immediately received relatively lenient treatment, while those that resisted faced systematic destruction. This policy encouraged quick surrender while demonstrating the futility of opposing Mongol forces. Xuanhua's conquest demonstrated the evolution of Mongol siege techniques. The city fell more quickly than Datong because Mongol engineers had improved their equipment and tactics. Chinese defectors continued to provide valuable intelligence about defensive preparations and internal conditions within besieged cities. Systematic destruction of resistant cities served both practical and psychological purposes. The complete elimination of populations that had opposed Mongol conquest removed potential sources of future rebellion. More importantly, stories of these destructions spread throughout China and encouraged other cities to surrender without fighting. The adaptation from steppe to urban warfare required fundamental changes in Mongol military organization. Traditional cavalry tactics had to be supplemented with infantry techniques needed for street fighting and wall assaults. Warriors who had spent their lives on horseback learned to fight effectively on foot in confined urban environments. Mongol commanders demonstrated remarkable flexibility in adjusting their tactics to meet new challenges. They maintained their traditional advantages in mobility and coordination, while developing capabilities in siege warfare and urban combat. This adaptability would prove crucial for success in diverse military environments throughout their empire. The psychological impact of early Mongol victories exceeded their actual military significance. Chinese armies began retreating before major engagements, unwilling to face forces that had gained reputations for invincibility. This pattern of psychological defeat often eliminated the need for actual battles. Local Chinese officials frequently chose to surrender their territories rather than face destruction. These submissions provided the Mongols with detailed intelligence about Chinese military preparations and political conditions. Surrendering officials often became valuable administrators in the emerging Mongol governmental system. The integration of Chinese military technology accelerated as more cities fell to Mongol forces. Captured weapons, armor, and siege equipment were studied and reproduced for Mongol use. Chinese metallurgy and craftsmanship enhanced the quality of Mongol military equipment significantly. Supply systems developed during the Chinese campaigns represented major innovations in nomadic military organization. Traditional steppe warfare relied on mobility and living off the land during short campaigns. Extended siege operations required supply lines capable of supporting large armies for months at predetermined locations. The recruitment of Chinese specialists expanded beyond military engineers to include administrators, craftsmen, and technical experts. These individuals provided skills that nomadic society lacked while serving Mongol strategic objectives. Their integration marked the beginning of the empire's multicultural bureaucracy. Mongol treatment of civilian populations varied according to the level of resistance encountered. Cities that surrendered immediately often retained their populations and economic systems under new management. Those that resisted faced deportation, enslavement, or execution depending on Mongol strategic requirements. The ultimate test of Mongol siege capabilities came with the assault on Zhongdu, the Jin dynasty's capital and largest city in northern China. With over 1 million inhabitants protected by walls 60 feet high and 30 feet thick, the city represented the greatest fortification challenge the Mongols had yet encountered. The decision to besiege the capital required careful strategic calculation. Success would effectively end Jin resistance in northern China and provide access to the dynasty's accumulated wealth. Failure would demonstrate Mongol limitations and potentially inspire Chinese resistance throughout the region. Preliminary operations focused on isolating the capital from potential relief forces and cutting supply lines that fed the massive urban population. Mongol cavalry units swept through the surrounding countryside, destroying food stores and eliminating Chinese forces that might threaten the siege operations. The siege began in earnest during the spring of 1214 when Mongol forces completely surrounded the city. The investment required careful coordination of multiple army groups positioned around Zhongdu's extensive perimeter. Communication between these units was maintained through the sophisticated signal systems that Genghis Khan had developed. Mongol siege equipment reached new levels of sophistication during the Zhongdu campaign. Chinese engineers had provided designs for catapults and siege towers that exceeded anything previously constructed by nomadic forces. The production of this equipment required workshops and raw materials that had to be transported from distant locations. The year-long siege tested both Mongol patience and organizational capabilities. Traditional nomadic warfare emphasized speed and mobility, but success at Zhongdu required sustained pressure over an extended period. Mongol commanders had to maintain discipline and morale among forces unaccustomed to stationary operations. Starvation became the primary weapon against the capital's defenders. The Mongol blockade prevented food supplies from reaching the city, while the massive population quickly exhausted stored provisions. Reports from inside the city described desperate conditions as civilians and soldiers competed for increasingly scarce resources. Urban warfare during the siege's final phase required Mongol forces to develop new tactical approaches. Street fighting differed completely from battlefield combat, requiring small unit coordination and individual warrior skills that complemented traditional archery and horsemanship. The Mongols proved remarkably adaptable to these unfamiliar conditions. The assault on Zhongdu's walls demonstrated the effectiveness of Mongol siege techniques. Coordinated attacks using catapults, siege towers, and scaling parties overcame defences that had previously seemed impregnable. The breach of the walls marked the end of effective Chinese resistance in the capital. Mass casualties among the civilian population reflected both the desperation of the final assault and deliberate Mongol policy towards cities that had resisted conquest. Contemporary accounts describe systematic killing that eliminated potential sources of future rebellion while serving as examples to other Chinese cities. The treasure captured during Zhongdu's fall exceeded anything the Mongols had previously encountered. Gold, silver, silk, and precious objects accumulated over generations filled the imperial palaces and wealthy merchant quarters. This wealth would finance future Mongol campaigns and transform the nomadic confederation into a world power. Chinese technology and craftsmanship acquired during the conquest enhanced Mongol military and administrative capabilities significantly. Siege engines, weapons, and manufacturing techniques were studied and adapted for nomadic use. Chinese metallurgy and engineering skills supplemented traditional nomadic crafts. The establishment of Mongol rule over the captured capital required administrative innovations that went beyond traditional nomadic governmental methods. Chinese bureaucrats were recruited to maintain essential urban services, while Mongol officials provided political leadership and military security. The integration of Chinese administrative systems marked the beginning of the hybrid governmental structure that would characterize the Mongol Empire. Traditional nomadic leadership was supplemented with sedentary bureaucratic methods needed to govern large urban populations and complex economic systems. Mongol policies toward the conquered population balanced practical necessities with strategic objectives. Useful specialists were preserved and recruited for imperial service, while potentially rebellious elements were eliminated or relocated. This selective approach maximized the benefits of conquest, while minimizing future security problems. The year-long siege tested both Mongol patience and organizational capabilities. Traditional nomadic warfare emphasized speed and mobility, but success at Zhongdu required sustained pressure over an extended period. Mongol commanders had to maintain discipline and morale among forces unaccustomed to stationary operations. Starvation became the primary weapon against the capital's defenders. The Mongol blockade prevented food supplies from reaching the city, while the massive population quickly exhausted stored provisions. Reports from inside the city described desperate conditions as civilians and soldiers competed for increasingly scarce resources. Urban warfare during the siege's final phase required Mongol forces to develop new tactical approaches. Street fighting differed completely from battlefield combat, requiring small unit coordination and individual warrior skills that complemented traditional archery and horsemanship. The Mongols proved remarkably adaptable to these unfamiliar conditions. The assault on Zhongdu's walls demonstrated the effectiveness of Mongol siege techniques. Coordinated attacks using catapults, siege towers, and scaling parties overcame defences that had previously seemed impregnable. The breach of the walls marked the end of effective Chinese resistance in the capital. Mass casualties among the civilian population reflected both the desperation of the final assault and deliberate Mongol policy towards cities that had resisted conquest. Contemporary accounts describe systematic killing that eliminated potential sources of future rebellion while serving as examples to other Chinese cities. The treasure captured during Zhongdu's fall exceeded anything the Mongols had previously encountered. Gold, silver, silk, and precious objects accumulated over generations filled the imperial palaces and wealthy merchant quarters. This wealth would finance future Mongol campaigns and transform the nomadic confederation into a world power. Chinese technology and craftsmanship acquired during the conquest enhanced Mongol military and administrative capabilities significantly. Siege engines, weapons, and manufacturing techniques were studied and adapted for nomadic use. Chinese metallurgy and engineering skills supplemented traditional nomadic crafts. The establishment of Mongol rule over the captured capital required administrative innovations that went beyond traditional nomadic governmental methods. Chinese bureaucrats were recruited to maintain essential urban services, while Mongol officials provided political leadership and military security. The integration of Chinese administrative systems marked the beginning of the hybrid governmental structure that would characterize the Mongol Empire. Traditional nomadic leadership was supplemented with sedentary bureaucratic methods needed to govern large urban populations and complex economic systems. Mongol policies toward the conquered population balanced practical necessities with strategic objectives. Useful specialists were preserved and recruited for imperial service, while potentially rebellious elements were eliminated or relocated. This selective approach maximized the benefits of conquest, while minimizing future security problems. The psychological impact of Zhongdu's fall resonated throughout China and beyond. The conquest of the Jin dynasty's greatest city demonstrated Mongol capability to overcome any defensive challenge. Stories of the siege spread throughout Eurasia, enhancing Mongol reputation for invincibility. Cultural exchange accelerated following the conquest as Mongol warriors encountered Chinese civilization directly. Many aspects of Chinese culture, from cuisine to entertainment, influenced Mongol customs. This cultural interaction would intensify as the empire expanded into other sedentary societies. The fall of Zhongdu marked a turning point in the Jin dynasty's resistance, but complete conquest of northern China required several more years of systematic campaigning. Genghis Khan's strategic genius appeared in his decision to leave trusted generals to complete the conquest while he turned his attention toward other objectives. Mukhali, one of Genghis Khan's most capable commanders, received responsibility for continuing the Chinese campaigns. This appointment demonstrated the Great Khan's confidence in his subordinates, while allowing him to pursue opportunities in Central Asia. The delegation of authority also tested the Mongol command structure's ability to operate independently. Mukhali's campaigns followed the systematic approach that had proven successful during the earlier phases of the conquest. Chinese cities faced the standard Mongol choice: immediate surrender with lenient treatment or resistance followed by complete destruction. Most chose submission rather than face the fate of cities that had opposed Mongol forces. The learning of Chinese administrative methods became essential for governing the increasingly complex territories under Mongol control. Traditional nomadic leadership was adequate for managing herders and warriors, but ruling millions of Chinese peasants and urban dwellers required bureaucratic skills that had to be acquired from Chinese specialists. Taxation systems represented one of the most important administrative innovations adopted from Chinese practice. The Mongols learned to extract wealth from agricultural and commercial activities through systematic tax collection, rather than relying solely on plunder. This approach provided sustainable revenue for ongoing military operations. Chinese bureaucratic methods were integrated selectively with Mongol governmental traditions. The decimal military organization was retained while Chinese record-keeping and administrative procedures were adopted for civilian governance. This hybrid system combined nomadic flexibility with sedentary efficiency. The integration of Chinese military technology proceeded rapidly as Mongol forces gained access to advanced weapons and manufacturing capabilities. Gunpowder weapons, though still primitive, were studied and incorporated into siege operations. Chinese metallurgy enhanced the quality of Mongol swords, arrows, and armor. Siege engines captured from Chinese forces were reproduced and improved by Mongol engineers. The knowledge gained during the Chinese campaigns would prove invaluable during future operations against other fortified civilizations. The Mongols had transformed from a purely nomadic force into a military organization capable of conducting any type of warfare. Chinese resistance continued in southern regions beyond direct Mongol control. The Song dynasty maintained independence south of the Yangtze River, while providing occasional support to Jin holdouts. This ongoing resistance would require future Mongol campaigns to complete Chinese unification. The Jin dynasty's final collapse came in 1234, years after Genghis Khan's death, when the last emperor was defeated by a combined Mongol-Song attack. The irony that Chinese forces participated in the final destruction of the Jin demonstrated the political complexities that the Mongol conquest had created. The foundation for future Chinese conquests was firmly established by the time of Genghis Khan's death. Mongol forces had learned siege warfare, acquired Chinese military technology, and developed administrative systems capable of governing sedentary populations. These capabilities would enable Kublai Khan's later conquest of the Song dynasty. The Chinese campaigns had transformed the Mongol Confederation from a steppe power into a world empire. The wealth and technological knowledge acquired during these operations provided resources for expansion in other directions. The experience of governing Chinese populations prepared Mongol administrators for ruling diverse civilizations throughout Eurasia. While Mongol forces continued their conquest of northern China, Genghis Khan's attention was drawn westward by an incident that would trigger the most destructive campaign in medieval history. The event that changed the course of world history began with what should have been a routine commercial transaction along the Silk Road. In 1218, Genghis Khan dispatched a large trade caravan to the Khwarezmid Empire, which controlled much of Central Asia and Persia. The mission included 450 merchants along with camels loaded with silk, furs, jade, and other valuable goods from China and Mongolia. This represented the largest diplomatic and commercial mission that the Mongols had ever sent to a foreign power. The caravan was officially endorsed by Genghis Khan himself, carrying his personal seal and diplomatic credentials. The merchants included Muslims, Chinese, and Mongols, reflecting the multicultural nature of the emerging Mongol Empire. Their mission was explicitly peaceful, designed to establish regular trade relations with the wealthy Khwarezmid territories. The merchants reached the city of Otrar, a major commercial centre on the Sirdaria River that served as a gateway between the steppe and the sedentary world. The city's governor, Inalchuk, was related to the Khwarezm Shah and wielded considerable authority over trade and diplomatic matters in the border regions. Inalchuk's decision to massacre the entire caravan and confiscate their goods stemmed from a combination of greed, suspicion, and political calculation. He viewed the large Mongol mission as a potential intelligence-gathering operation disguised as trade. The valuable goods carried by the merchants provided an additional incentive for their elimination. The governor's actions violated every principle of international commerce and diplomatic immunity that governed Silk Road trade. Merchants had traditionally enjoyed protection while conducting business, regardless of political relations between their home governments. Inalchuk's attack shattered centuries of commercial custom and legal precedent. News of the massacre reached Genghis Khan through surviving witnesses who had escaped the slaughter. The reports described how the merchants had been tortured and executed, their goods seized, and their camels and horses appropriated by Inalchuk's forces. Only one merchant managed to escape and carry word of the atrocity back to Mongolia. Genghis Khan's initial response demonstrated his preference for diplomatic solutions over immediate military action. He sent envoys to the Khwarezm Shah, demanding the surrender of Inalchuk for punishment and compensation for the losses suffered by the merchant families. This measured response offered the Shah an opportunity to avoid war through appropriate justice. The Khwarezm Shah's rejection of these reasonable demands escalated the crisis beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution. Instead of surrendering Inalchuk, the Shah publicly defended his governor's actions. Even worse, he ordered the execution of the Mongol envoys, violating the most sacred principles of diplomatic immunity. The execution of diplomats represented an insult so profound that it demanded total war in response. Mongol culture held diplomatic immunity as sacred, and the Shah's action was seen as an attack on Mongol honour that could not be forgiven or forgotten. The incident became the justification for a campaign of unprecedented destruction. Genghis Khan's declaration of war against the Khwarezmid Empire marked a turning point in his strategic objectives. Previously, Mongol expansion had focused on unifying the steppes and conquering adjacent territories. The Western campaign would test Mongol capabilities against a major Islamic civilization at the height of its power and cultural achievement. The scale of the proposed campaign required mobilization of resources that exceeded anything the Mongols had previously attempted. The Khwarezmid Empire stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, encompassing some of the world's greatest cities and most prosperous agricultural regions. Conquest would require sustained operations across vast distances. Intelligence gathering intensified as Genghis Khan prepared for the massive undertaking ahead. Mongol agents disguised as merchants and travellers systematically explored Khwarezmid territories. They mapped roads, identified military installations, and assessed the political loyalty of different regions and populations. The diplomatic crisis also provided propaganda advantages that Genghis Khan exploited effectively. The massacre of merchants and execution of envoys gave the Mongols moral justification for their invasion. They could present themselves as seeking justice for unprovoked attacks rather than simply pursuing conquest for its own sake. The decision to turn the full force of the Mongol war machine against the Khwarezmid Empire represented one of history's most momentous strategic choices. This campaign would bring nomadic and Islamic civilizations into their most significant confrontation, while reshaping the political geography of Central Asia and the Middle East. The preparation for the Khwarezmid campaign required mobilization of the largest army in Mongol history. Genghis Khan assembled approximately 200,000 warriors, drawing forces from every tribe and conquered territory under his authority. This massive force represented nearly the entire military strength of the unified steppe confederation. The organizational challenge of coordinating such a large army across vast distances tested every aspect of Mongol military administration. Units had to be equipped, supplied, and coordinated, while maintaining the mobility that was essential for nomadic warfare. Traditional steppe armies had never operated at this scale or over such extended distances. Supply planning reached new levels of sophistication as Mongol administrators calculated the logistical requirements for extended operations in unfamiliar territory. Each warrior required multiple horses, weapons, food supplies, and equipment. The total number of animals accompanying the army probably exceeded 500,000 horses, camels, and cattle. The route to Khwarezmid territories required crossing some of the world's most challenging terrain. The army would have to traverse deserts, mountain passes, and hostile territories before reaching their primary objectives. Each geographic obstacle required specific preparations and specialized equipment. Intelligence networks provided detailed information about Khwarezmid military capabilities and political conditions. Mongol spies had systematically mapped enemy territories, identified key targets, and assessed the loyalty of different populations. This information enabled precise planning of campaign objectives and tactical approaches. Mongol agents reported that the Khwarezmid Empire possessed formidable military resources, including hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sophisticated siege equipment, and strong fortifications. However, their intelligence also revealed critical weaknesses in enemy coordination and leadership that could be exploited during the invasion. Psychological preparation of the invasion force emphasized the righteous nature of their mission. The massacre of merchants and execution of envoys provided moral justification that strengthened warrior motivation. Shamans performed rituals invoking Tengri's blessing on the campaign while promising divine support for their cause. The spread of terror preceded the actual Mongol arrival, as stories of their approach reached Khwarezmid territories. Refugees fleeing the advancing army carried tales of Mongol invincibility and ruthlessness that weakened enemy morale before any battles were fought. This psychological warfare proved as effective as actual military operations. The march westward demonstrated the extraordinary organizational capabilities that the Mongols had developed. The massive army maintained coordination across hundreds of miles while adapting to changing terrain and climate conditions. Communication systems allowed commanders to coordinate movements of widely separated units. Crossing the Kizilkum Desert tested Mongol logistics and endurance under extreme conditions. Water sources were scarce and had to be carefully managed to prevent the army from dying of thirst. The Mongols solved this challenge through detailed advance planning and systematic utilization of available resources. Mountain passes presented different obstacles that required specialized equipment and techniques. The army had to move siege engines, supply wagons, and hundreds of thousands of animals through narrow defiles where traditional mobility advantages were reduced. These operations demonstrated remarkable flexibility in Mongol military capabilities. Local populations encountered during the march faced the standard Mongol choice: immediate submission with lenient treatment or resistance followed by destruction. Most communities chose submission, providing the invading army with additional supplies, intelligence, and guides familiar with local conditions. The approach to Khwarezmid borders was carefully coordinated to maximize strategic surprise, while preventing enemy forces from concentrating for effective resistance. Mongol columns advanced along multiple routes, creating confusion about their primary objectives while threatening several important targets simultaneously. Communication with commanders continuing operations in China required maintenance of courier routes across thousands of miles. The YAM system demonstrated its effectiveness by enabling coordination of military activities on opposite sides of Asia. This capability allowed Genghis Khan to direct a world war from his field headquarters. The scale of the invasion force reflected Genghis Khan's determination to eliminate the Khwarezmid Empire completely. Previous Mongol campaigns had sought conquest and submission, but the Western expedition aimed at total destruction of enemy resistance. This objective required resources and commitment that exceeded all earlier military operations. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmid Empire began with the siege of Otrar, the city where the merchant massacre had occurred. This was more than strategic necessity. It was personal revenge for the insult that had triggered the entire campaign. Genghis Khan was determined to make an example that would be remembered for generations. The siege of Otrar lasted 5 months and demonstrated the full evolution of Mongol siege warfare capabilities. Chinese engineers provided technical expertise, while Mongol warriors adapted their traditional tactics to urban warfare. The prolonged resistance of the city's defenders only guaranteed that their eventual fate would be more terrible. Inalchuk, the governor responsible for the merchant massacre, became the focus of Mongol vengeance when the city finally fell. According to historical accounts, molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears as punishment for his greed and treachery. His death was designed to be both personally satisfying and symbolically meaningful. The complete destruction of Otrar established the pattern that would characterize the entire Khwarezmid campaign. Every building was demolished, every inhabitant was killed, and the irrigation systems that supported agricultural life were systematically destroyed. The city's location was so thoroughly obliterated that later travelers could not identify where it had stood. The division of Mongol forces into multiple columns allowed simultaneous attacks on widely separated targets throughout the Khwarezmid Empire. This strategy prevented enemy forces from concentrating for effective resistance, while maximizing the psychological impact of Mongol operations. No region felt safe from potential attack. Genghis Khan personally led the assault on Bukhara, one of Central Asia's greatest centers of learning and culture. The city's capture required sophisticated siege operations that demonstrated how completely the Mongols had mastered urban warfare. When the walls were breached, Genghis Khan reportedly declared to the assembled population, "I am the punishment of God." The systematic destruction of Bukhara eliminated centuries of Islamic scholarship and cultural achievement. Libraries containing tens of thousands of manuscripts were burned, madrasas were demolished, and scholars were killed or enslaved. The Mongols showed no interest in preserving cultural treasures that had no military or economic value. Samarkand's fate differed from that of other Khwarezmid cities because its population chose immediate surrender rather than resistance. This decision saved most inhabitants from massacre, while demonstrating the effectiveness of Mongol psychological warfare. Stories of destroyed cities convinced other populations that submission offered the only hope for survival. The hunt for the fleeing Khwarezm Shah became an epic pursuit that carried Mongol forces across much of the Islamic world. Subutai and Jabi led 20,000 warriors in relentless pursuit of the enemy ruler, who fled from city to city seeking refuge. This chase served both strategic and symbolic purposes. The Shah's flight from his own territories demonstrated the collapse of Khwarezmid authority, while preventing him from organizing effective resistance. His desperate attempts to find sanctuary revealed the weakness of his alliances and the terror that Mongol forces inspired throughout the Islamic world. The pursuit continued across Persia and into the Caucasus Mountains as the Shah desperately sought allies willing to oppose the Mongol advance. However, his reputation for weakness and the fear of Mongol retaliation made other rulers reluctant to provide meaningful assistance. The Shah died of exhaustion and despair on an island in the Caspian Sea. The systematic destruction of irrigation systems represented one of the most devastating aspects of the Mongol campaign. These engineering works had supported agricultural civilization for millennia, allowing desert regions to sustain large populations. Their destruction created permanent economic devastation that lasted for centuries. Contemporary accounts describe the thoroughness with which Mongol forces eliminated urban civilization throughout Central Asia. Cities that had flourished for hundreds of years were reduced to ruins that provided homes only for wild animals. The human cost of the campaign probably exceeded 1 million deaths. The capture of artisans and technical specialists provided long-term benefits for the Mongol Empire, while contributing to the devastation of conquered territories. Craftsmen who produced luxury goods, military equipment, and architectural works were relocated to serve Mongol needs in other regions. The integration of Islamic administrative practices enhanced Mongol governmental capabilities, while demonstrating their willingness to adopt useful techniques from conquered civilizations. Persian bureaucrats and legal scholars were recruited to serve the empire while Islamic commercial law was studied and selectively applied. The economic impact of the Khwarezmid conquest extended far beyond the immediate destruction of cities and agricultural systems. Trade routes that had connected east and west were disrupted, causing commercial networks to collapse throughout Eurasia. Recovery from this economic devastation required generations. Cultural exchange accelerated despite the destruction, as surviving Islamic scholars and artists were incorporated into the Mongol Empire. Their knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and other sciences enriched Mongol civilization while spreading Islamic learning to other parts of the empire. The campaign's conclusion marked the complete elimination of the Khwarezmid Empire as a political and military force. The speed and thoroughness of this destruction demonstrated Mongol military capabilities while sending a clear message to other civilizations about the consequences of opposing Genghis Khan's will. The pursuit of the fleeing Khwarezm Shah led Subutai and Jibe with 20,000 Mongol warriors far beyond their original objectives into completely unknown territories. This remarkable expedition became one of history's greatest reconnaissance missions, carrying Mongol forces into Europe for the first time and gathering intelligence that would shape future campaigns. The two generals had been ordered to capture the Shah at any cost, but his death on an island in the Caspian Sea freed them to explore the regions beyond Khwarezmid territories. Their subsequent march through the Caucasus Mountains and into the Russian steppes represented an extraordinary adventure that tested Mongol capabilities in unfamiliar environments. The passage through the Caucasus required negotiations with local peoples who controlled the mountain passes. Some groups chose to guide the Mongols in exchange for payment and promises of protection. Others attempted to block their passage and were destroyed by forces that had mastered mountain warfare during their Asian campaigns. The emergence of Mongol forces onto the European steppes brought them into contact with peoples and political systems completely different from anything they had previously encountered. The Russian principalities represented Orthodox Christian civilization, while nomadic groups like the Cumans maintained traditions similar to those of Central Asian peoples. Russian political fragmentation provided opportunities that experienced Mongol diplomats were quick to exploit. The princes of different cities competed with each other, rather than cooperating against external threats. This division allowed relatively small Mongol forces to manipulate much larger populations through careful alliance-making. The Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223 marked the first major Mongol victory on European soil. A coalition of Russian princes and Cuman allies assembled an army of approximately 80,000 warriors to oppose the Mongol reconnaissance force. The resulting engagement demonstrated European military weaknesses that would prove decisive in future campaigns. Traditional European military tactics proved completely inadequate against Mongol mobility and coordination. Russian heavy cavalry and infantry formations could not cope with the rapid maneuvers and concentrated archery that characterized steppe warfare. The feigned retreat that had defeated Chinese and Islamic armies worked equally effectively against European forces. The destruction of the Russian-Cuman coalition eliminated the most significant military force in Eastern Europe, while providing detailed intelligence about European military capabilities. Mongol commanders observed European weapons, tactics, and organizational methods that would influence planning for future invasions. The treatment of captured Russian princes followed Mongol customs regarding the fate of defeated leaders. Those who had shown courage in battle received honorable deaths, while others faced execution for their failure to provide effective leadership. These actions established Mongol reputation for both honor and ruthlessness among European populations. The withdrawal through the Caucasus provided additional opportunities for intelligence gathering, while testing Mongol logistics under adverse conditions. The return journey required crossing hostile territories, where local populations had learned about Mongol methods and prepared appropriate countermeasures. Mongol relations with Caucasian peoples demonstrated the flexibility of their diplomatic approach. Groups that provided assistance received generous rewards and protection, while those that opposed the Mongol passage faced severe retaliation. This policy encouraged cooperation while deterring resistance. The reconnaissance missions returned to Central Asia brought in valuable intelligence about European political conditions, military capabilities, and geographic features. This information would prove crucial for planning the later invasions that would bring Mongol rule to much of Eastern Europe under Genghis Khan's successors. The success of Subutai and Jebi's expedition demonstrated Mongol capability to conduct independent operations across vast distances in completely unfamiliar territories. Their achievement reflected the high quality of Mongol leadership and the effectiveness of their military organization under extreme conditions. The European reconnaissance established precedents for Mongol expansion that would guide future campaigns. The expedition demonstrated that European military forces posed no serious threat to well-led Mongol armies, while revealing opportunities for conquest that exceeded anything available in Asia. The intelligence gathered during this remarkable journey influenced Mongol strategic thinking for decades to come. European wealth, political divisions, and military weaknesses provided tempting targets for future expansion, while the geographic knowledge gained during the reconnaissance made such campaigns logistically feasible. The years following the destruction of the Khwarezmid Empire marked Genghis Khan's transformation from conqueror to administrator. The Great Khan returned to Mongolia in 1225, carrying unimaginable wealth and thousands of skilled captives who would reshape his nomadic empire into a sophisticated civilization. The triumphant homecoming displayed the fruits of conquest to the Mongol people. Caravans stretched for miles across the steppes, loaded with gold, silver, silk, precious stones, and luxury goods that most nomads had never seen. Chinese craftsmen, Persian engineers, and Islamic scholars walked alongside the warriors who had captured them. The vast wealth from conquered territories transformed Mongol society at every level. Common warriors who had lived in felt tents now possessed silk clothing and precious ornaments. Tribal leaders who had previously competed for grazing rights now controlled the revenues of entire cities. The economic foundation had been laid for a world empire. Captured artisans and specialists began transforming the physical landscape of Mongolia itself. Chinese engineers designed irrigation systems that brought agriculture to previously barren regions. Persian architects planned permanent buildings that supplemented traditional nomadic dwellings. Islamic craftsmen produced luxury goods that rivaled anything created in the conquered territories. Administrative developments reflected the growing complexity of governing territories that stretched from China to the Caspian Sea. Traditional Mongol leadership methods were adequate for managing nomadic tribes, but inadequate for ruling millions of sedentary subjects with diverse languages, religions, and customs. The integration of foreign administrators created a multi-ethnic bureaucracy that combined nomadic flexibility with sedentary expertise. Chinese officials contributed knowledge of taxation systems and record-keeping. Islamic administrators provided experience in commercial law and urban management. Christian scribes added literacy skills essential for governing diverse populations. Legal codification reached new levels of sophistication as the Yasa was expanded to address situations that had never existed in traditional nomadic society. The legal code now covered commercial transactions, religious practices, diplomatic relations, and administrative procedures that reflected the empire's multicultural character. The Yasa's application across conquered territories created legal unity that transcended cultural and linguistic boundaries. Islamic merchants trading with Chinese craftsmen operated under the same basic laws. Buddhist monks and Christian priests enjoyed the same religious protections. This legal standardization facilitated both administration and commerce throughout the empire. Religious policy became increasingly important as the empire encompassed peoples practicing every major world religion. Genghis Khan's pragmatic tolerance served both philosophical and strategic purposes. Religious diversity could strengthen the empire if properly managed, but religious conflicts could destroy it from within. The Great Khan's personal religious consultations demonstrated his openness to wisdom from all sources. He met with Taoist monks, Buddhist teachers, Christian missionaries, and Islamic scholars. These encounters reflected genuine intellectual curiosity as well as political calculation about maintaining stability among diverse religious communities. The establishment of religious equality under imperial law represented a revolutionary development in medieval governance. Most contemporary empires imposed their rulers' religion on conquered subjects. The Mongol approach of protecting all faiths attracted voluntary submission from religious minorities throughout Eurasia. Planning for future conquests occupied much of Genghis Khan's attention during these consolidation years. The European reconnaissance had revealed opportunities for expansion westward. The incomplete conquest of China suggested possibilities for further campaigns eastward. The wealth of India and Southeast Asia provided additional tempting targets. Military preparations for future campaigns required adapting Mongol forces to diverse types of warfare. The European reconnaissance had demonstrated the effectiveness of traditional Mongol tactics against European armies. However, naval operations would be necessary for conquering Japan or the Southeast Asian kingdoms. The development of siege warfare capabilities accelerated as Chinese and Islamic engineers shared their expertise with Mongol military leaders. New designs for catapults, siege towers, and fortification techniques were tested and refined. These innovations would prove essential for future campaigns against heavily fortified civilizations. Intelligence networks expanded to cover potential targets throughout the known world. Mongol agents, often disguised as merchants or diplomats, systematically explored India, Southeast Asia, and Western Europe. Their reports provided detailed information about military capabilities, political conditions, and economic resources. The training of Genghis Khan's sons and grandsons for future leadership roles reflected his understanding that the empire had grown beyond the capacity of any single ruler. Each potential heir received education in military command, diplomatic relations, and administrative management. This preparation would prove crucial for the empire's continued expansion. Diplomatic relations with surviving independent powers became increasingly sophisticated as the Mongol Empire emerged as a major player in international politics. Embassies were exchanged with the Song dynasty, European kingdoms, and Indian states. These contacts provided intelligence while demonstrating Mongol power to potential enemies and allies. Despite his advancing age and growing health problems, Genghis Khan embarked on one final military campaign in 1226 against the Western Xia kingdom. This decision reflected both strategic necessity and personal honour, as the Tangut rulers had failed to fulfill their obligations as Mongol vassals. The reasons for the campaign went beyond simple military strategy to touch the fundamental principles of Mongol governance. When Genghis Khan had initially conquered Western Xia, the Tangut rulers had agreed to provide military support for future Mongol operations. Their failure to send troops for the Khwarezmid campaign represented a betrayal that demanded punishment. The personal nature of this final war reflected Genghis Khan's declining health and his determination to complete unfinished business. At age 64, the Great Khan was suffering from various ailments that limited his physical capabilities. However, his mental acuity and strategic genius remained undiminished. The campaign against Western Xia took on symbolic importance that exceeded its military significance. Genghis Khan was demonstrating to all his subjects and potential enemies that betrayal of Mongol authority would never be tolerated regardless of circumstances. This message was crucial for maintaining imperial unity across vast distances. The invasion of Western Xia proceeded methodically as Mongol forces systematically reduced Tangut strongholds throughout the kingdom. The defenders fought desperately, knowing that their previous betrayal had eliminated any possibility of merciful treatment. Every fortress and city became a battle to the death. Genghis Khan's illness worsened during the campaign, but he refused to abandon the operation or delegate command to his subordinates. His physical presence was essential for maintaining troop morale while demonstrating his unwavering commitment to completing the conquest. The Great Khan's determination inspired his warriors to extraordinary efforts. The siege of Yinchuan, the Western Xia capital, became Genghis Khan's final great military achievement. The city's massive fortifications and desperate defenders required all his accumulated expertise in siege warfare. Chinese engineers employed the most advanced techniques, while Mongol warriors displayed their traditional courage and skill. The capital's desperate resistance prolonged the siege for several months as the defenders realized that surrender would bring no mercy. Tangut warriors fought with the fury of men who knew their civilization faced complete extinction. Their courage earned respect from Mongol warriors even as it sealed their fate. The psychological pressure of conducting siege operations while battling serious illness tested even Genghis Khan's legendary determination. However, he maintained command effectiveness while hiding the extent of his physical deterioration from his troops. His personal strength held the army together during the difficult final phase of the campaign. The fall of Yinchuan marked the end of Western Xia as an independent kingdom. The city's capture eliminated the last center of Tangut resistance, while providing access to accumulated wealth and strategic territory. However, the victory's cost included a serious worsening of Genghis Khan's medical condition. The Khan's last victory demonstrated his undiminished strategic brilliance even as his body failed. The systematic reduction of Western Xia resistance followed the same methodical approach that had characterized all his successful campaigns. Experience and intelligence triumphed over youth and physical strength. The order for complete extinction of the Tangut people represented Genghis Khan's final act of imperial policy. This genocide would eliminate forever the possibility of future rebellion, while serving as the ultimate example of the consequences of betraying Mongol trust. The order reflected both practical calculation and personal vengeance. The symbolic importance of the Western Xia campaign extended far beyond its immediate military objectives. Genghis Khan was demonstrating that no betrayal would go unpunished regardless of his personal condition or the empire's other priorities. This message strengthened imperial authority throughout his domains. Genghis Khan's final illness developed during the Western Jia campaign, though the exact nature of his condition remains disputed by historical sources. Some accounts suggest he suffered from injuries sustained during a hunting accident, while others describe a gradual decline from various ailments associated with advanced age and the stresses of constant campaigning. The Great Khan's determination to complete the Western Jia conquest despite his declining health demonstrated his unwavering commitment to imperial responsibilities. He concealed the severity of his condition from most of his followers, while continuing to direct military operations and make crucial strategic decisions. His deathbed instructions revealed both his strategic vision and his concerns about the empire's future stability. He ordered the complete destruction of the Western Xia kingdom to eliminate any possibility of future rebellion. He also provided detailed plans for continuing the conquest of the Jin dynasty and eventual expansion into Europe. The selection of Ogedei as his successor over his elder son Yoki reflected Genghis Khan's wisdom in choosing ability over traditional inheritance customs. Ogedei possessed the diplomatic skills and administrative capabilities necessary for governing the increasingly complex empire. This decision demonstrated the Great Khan's commitment to meritocratic leadership principles. The designation of Tolui as regent until Ogedei's formal election ensured continuity of leadership during the critical transition period. Tolui's military reputation and family loyalty made him an ideal interim leader who could maintain imperial stability while preparations were made for the succession Kurultai. Instructions regarding the empire's future expansion reflected Genghis Khan's global vision and strategic thinking. He envisioned Mongol rule extending to Western Europe, the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia. These plans provided a roadmap that would guide his successor's military campaigns for decades to come. The secret burial arrangements demonstrated Genghis Khan's concern for preventing his tomb from becoming a target for enemies or a site of political controversy. His body was transported back to Mongolia under conditions of absolute secrecy. Everyone who participated in the burial ceremony was reportedly executed to preserve the secret of the location. The location of Genghis Khan's tomb remains unknown to this day, despite centuries of searching by archaeologists and treasure hunters. This mystery has become part of his legend, while fulfilling his desire to rest in peace without disturbance from future generations. The secret burial demonstrated forward thinking that transcended immediate concerns. The immediate aftermath of his death required careful management to prevent the empire from fragmenting during the succession process. His family and senior commanders cooperated to maintain the appearance of continuity, while secretly conducting the elaborate funeral rites appropriate for the world's most powerful ruler. The great mourning that followed the announcement of Genghis Khan's death demonstrated the profound impact he had made on his contemporaries. Warriors who had followed him for decades grieved for the leader who had transformed their lives and created opportunities they could never have imagined. His death marked the end of an extraordinary era in human history. The completion of the Western Xia destruction according to his final orders proved that Mongol authority would continue unchanged despite his death. The systematic genocide of the Tangut people served as the Great Khan's final message to potential rebels throughout the empire. His will would be enforced even from beyond the grave. The empire paused to honor its creator with ceremonies that reflected both Mongol traditions and the multicultural character of his domains. Shamanic rituals honored his spirit according to ancestral customs, while Buddhist, Christian, and Islamic prayers were offered by subjects from conquered territories. The diversity of the mourning reflected the empire's unprecedented inclusiveness. At the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol Empire had become the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Its territories stretched from Korea in the east to the Caspian Sea in the west, encompassing vast regions of China, Central Asia, and parts of Eastern Europe. This achievement represented the transformation of fragmented nomadic tribes into a world power within a single generation. The population under Mongol rule probably exceeded 50 million people, representing dozens of different ethnic groups, languages, and religious traditions. Chinese peasants, Islamic merchants, Christian craftsmen and nomadic herders all lived under the same imperial authority while maintaining their distinct cultural identities. The territorial extent of the empire created unprecedented challenges and opportunities for governance. Communications across such vast distances required the sophisticated postal system that Genghis Khan had developed. Administrative coordination demanded bureaucratic innovations that combined nomadic flexibility with sedentary expertise. Military legacy represented perhaps Genghis Khan's most significant achievement. His forces had never suffered a major defeat, and his tactical innovations had revolutionized warfare throughout Eurasia. The decimal organization system, psychological warfare techniques, and siege capabilities he developed would influence military thinking for centuries. The integration of diverse military technologies from conquered civilizations had created the world's most effective armed forces. Chinese siege engines, Islamic metallurgy, and European armor were combined with traditional Mongol mobility and archery. This synthesis produced military capabilities that no contemporary force could match. Cultural impact extended far beyond military conquest to encompass religious tolerance, commercial protection, and intellectual exchange. The empire's policies had created conditions for unprecedented cultural interaction between East and West. Islamic science, Chinese technology, and European craftsmanship began flowing along trade routes that Mongol protection had revitalized. Religious tolerance had become a defining characteristic of Mongol rule throughout the empire. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and practitioners of traditional faiths enjoyed equal protection under imperial law. This policy had prevented religious conflicts that might have destroyed the empire while attracting voluntary submission from religious minorities. Trade promotion had revitalized the Silk Road and created commercial opportunities that exceeded anything previously experienced. Merchants could travel safely from China to Europe under Mongol protection. Standardized currencies, weights, and measures facilitated commerce between distant regions and different cultures. The foundation laid by Genghis Khan provided his successors with resources and institutional structures necessary for even further expansion. His administrative innovations, military capabilities, and diplomatic relationships created platforms for future conquests that would extend Mongol rule to additional continents and civilizations. The election of Ögedei Khan as Genghis Khan's successor in 1229 marked the continuation of Mongol expansion under a leader whose diplomatic skills and administrative abilities proved perfectly suited to governing the world's largest empire. The 2-year interregnum under Tolui's regency had maintained imperial stability while demonstrating the strength of institutions that Genghis Khan had created. Consolidating his father's legacy required Ögedei to complete several unfinished military campaigns while establishing his personal authority over an empire that spanned multiple continents. The conquest of the Jin dynasty remained incomplete. European territories beckoned for further expansion, and various rebellions threatened imperial control in remote regions. The final destruction of the Jin dynasty in northern China represented Ögedei's first major military achievement as Great Khan. Chinese resistance had continued despite years of Mongol pressure, but coordinated campaigns by multiple army groups finally eliminated the last vestiges of Jin independence. This victory demonstrated that Mongol military effectiveness had not diminished following Genghis Khan's death. Administrative reforms reflected Ögedei's recognition that governing sedentary populations required different approaches than managing nomadic tribes. The establishment of Karakorum as a permanent imperial capital marked a fundamental shift in Mongol governmental structure. For the first time, the empire possessed a fixed administrative centre that could coordinate activities across vast distances. Karakorum's construction required resources and expertise from throughout the empire. Chinese architects designed buildings using Persian decorative techniques. European craftsmen worked alongside Islamic artisans to create a city that reflected the empire's multicultural character. The capital became a symbol of Mongol power and cultural synthesis. Taxation systems developed during Ögedei's reign created sustainable revenue sources that reduced imperial dependence on plunder from military campaigns. Chinese agricultural taxes, Islamic commercial duties, and European tribute payments provided regular income that could support administrative expenses and military operations. This financial foundation enabled long-term strategic planning. The European invasion represented the most ambitious military campaign undertaken during Ogedai's reign. Batu Khan and Subutai led approximately 150,000 warriors westward to complete the conquest that Genghis Khan had envisioned. This massive force represented the largest army ever assembled for operations in Europe. Batu Khan's leadership of the European campaign demonstrated the effectiveness of Mongol succession planning and military training. As Genghis Khan's grandson, he possessed both family authority and proven military ability. His coordination with the veteran General Subutai combined youthful energy with experienced strategic thinking. Subutai's role in the European campaigns represented the culmination of a legendary military career. The old general who had served Genghis Khan for decades brought unmatched expertise in coordinating complex operations across vast distances. His strategic vision transformed European conquest from ambitious dream into achievable objective. The systematic destruction of Russian resistance eliminated the most significant military obstacle to Mongol expansion into Central Europe. The fall of Kiev in 1240 marked the end of Russian independence and demonstrated Mongol capability to assault even the strongest European fortifications. Contemporary accounts describe devastation that exceeded anything previously experienced in European warfare. The invasion of Poland and Hungary in 1241 tested Mongol forces against the military elite of medieval Europe. The battles of Mohi and Legnia resulted in crushing defeats for European armies, despite their advantages in armour, fortification, and local knowledge. These victories opened the path for further expansion into Western Europe. The death of Ogedai Khan in December 1241 abruptly ended the European campaign just as Mongol forces were preparing to advance into the German states and France. Batu Khan's withdrawal to Mongolia for the succession, Kurultai, probably saved Western Europe from conquest. This timing represented one of history's most significant coincidences. The consequences of Ogedai's death extended far beyond the immediate cessation of European conquest. The succession crisis that followed created opportunities for regional independence while weakening imperial unity. The timing demonstrated how dependent the empire had become on individual leadership despite its sophisticated institutional structures. The succession crisis following Ogedai Khan's death revealed structural weaknesses in the Mongol Empire that would eventually lead to its fragmentation into separate khanates. The contest between different branches of Genghis Khan's family reflected competing visions for the empire's future development and administrative organization. The election of Minka Khan in 1251 temporarily restored imperial unity under the leadership of Tolui's son. Minka represented a return to the military traditions and expansionist policies that had characterized Genghis Khan's reign. However, his death in 1259 created another succession crisis that would permanently divide the empire. The four khanates that emerged from the empire's division reflected both geographic realities and family politics. Each region possessed distinct characteristics that made unified governance increasingly difficult, as distances and cultural differences created centrifugal forces stronger than the imperial loyalty. The Yuan dynasty in China represented Kublai Khan's adaptation of Mongol rule to Chinese governmental traditions. His decision to establish a permanent capital at Khanbalik, Beijing, marked a fundamental shift away from nomadic political organization. The adoption of Chinese imperial customs attracted Chinese support while alienating traditional Mongol supporters. Kublai's focus on China required him to develop administrative capabilities that exceeded anything previously attempted by nomadic rulers. The complexity of governing the world's largest sedentary population demanded bureaucratic innovations that transformed Mongol governance into something resembling traditional Chinese dynasties. The completion of Chinese unification through the conquest of the Song dynasty represented the culmination of Mongol expansion in East Asia. This achievement required naval capabilities and siege techniques that pushed Mongol military adaptation to its limits. The final victory demonstrated that nomadic peoples could successfully govern advanced sedentary civilizations. The Ilkhanate in Persia developed under the leadership of Hulagu Khan, who conquered Baghdad and eliminated the Abbasid Caliphate. This achievement ended centuries of Islamic political unity, while establishing Mongol rule over the heartland of Islamic civilization. The cultural consequences of this conquest influenced both Mongol and Islamic development. Islamic conversion gradually transformed the Ilkhanate from a nomadic occupation force into a Persian Islamic dynasty. This religious and cultural assimilation created conflicts with other Mongol khanates, while demonstrating the powerful influence of local traditions on nomadic conquerors. The conversion process reflected broader patterns of Mongol adaptation throughout the empire. The Golden Horde in Eastern Europe maintained nomadic traditions longer than other khanates while exercising political control over Russian principalities. The tribute system established by Batu Khan created a unique form of indirect rule that preserved Russian governmental structures under Mongol supervision. Russian resistance to Mongol rule developed gradually as local leaders learned to exploit divisions within the Golden Horde. The rise of Moscow as the center of Russian independence efforts reflected both geographic advantages and skillful diplomacy by Russian princes who played different Mongol factions against each other. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia became the most conservative of the successor states, maintaining traditional Mongol customs and nomadic lifestyle longer than other regions. This cultural conservatism reflected the geographic and social conditions of Central Asian steppes, which were most similar to the original Mongol homeland. Religious and cultural conflicts within the Chagatai Khanate reflected tensions between nomadic traditions and sedentary influences. The gradual conversion to Islam created divisions between different groups within the Khanate, while reducing connections with non-Muslim Mongol states. The end of unified Mongol rule marked the beginning of separate development paths for different regions of the former empire. Each Khanate adapted to local conditions and cultural influences, creating distinct political and social systems that retained few connections to their common nomadic origins. The Mongol Empire's greatest legacy lay not in its military conquests, but in the unprecedented cultural and technological exchange that its protection and encouragement of trade created throughout Eurasia. The revival of the Silk Road under Mongol rule facilitated connections between civilizations that had never experienced such sustained interaction. Trade connections established under Mongol protection created commercial networks that exceeded anything previously achieved in human history. Merchants could travel safely from Venice to Beijing while carrying goods that represented the finest achievements of each civilization. Chinese silk, Indian spices, Islamic science, and European craftsmanship flowed along routes protected by Mongol authority. Technology transfer accelerated dramatically as the empire facilitated communication between previously isolated civilizations. Gunpowder weapons developed in China reached European battlefields within decades of their invention. Islamic navigation instruments enhanced Chinese naval capabilities. European metallurgy improved the quality of weapons throughout Asia. The printing press represented perhaps the most significant technological transfer facilitated by Mongol trade routes. Chinese printing techniques reached Europe through Islamic intermediaries, creating the foundation for the intellectual revolutions that would transform European civilization. This technology transfer demonstrated the empire's role in global human development. Religious interactions created unprecedented opportunities for theological and philosophical exchange. Buddhist monks traveled from Tibet to Mongol courts in Persia. Christian missionaries journeyed from Europe to China. Islamic scholars studied in libraries from Cordoba to Karakorum. These interactions enriched all religious traditions while promoting mutual understanding. Artistic synthesis produced new forms of creative expression that combined elements from multiple civilizations. Persian miniature painting incorporated Chinese techniques and Islamic themes. European manuscript illumination adopted Islamic geometric patterns. Chinese ceramics reflected Persian and Central Asian decorative motifs. The patronage of arts and learning by Mongol rulers created cultural centers that attracted scholars and artists from throughout the known world. Karakorum became a cosmopolitan city where scholars from different civilizations collaborated on projects that no single culture could have accomplished independently. Diplomatic connections established by the Mongol Empire created the first truly global network of international relations. Papal envoys travelled to Mongolia, while Mongol ambassadors visited European courts. These diplomatic exchanges provided mutual knowledge that would influence international relations for centuries. Medical knowledge exchanged through Mongol trade routes enhanced healthcare throughout Eurasia. Islamic medical texts were translated into Chinese and Mongolian. European surgical techniques were studied in Islamic hospitals. Traditional Chinese medicine was practiced in Persian cities. This medical exchange saved countless lives and advanced human knowledge. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge flowed along Mongol trade routes, creating the first global scientific community. Islamic algebraic techniques reached Chinese mathematicians. Indian numerical systems were adopted throughout the empire. European astronomical observations were compared with Chinese records. These exchanges accelerated scientific progress throughout Eurasia. Language development was profoundly influenced by Mongol policies that encouraged multilingual communication. Persian became the diplomatic language throughout much of Asia. Chinese administrative techniques were adapted for governing diverse populations. Arabic script was used to write Mongol and Turkish languages. This linguistic mixing created rich literary traditions. Educational institutions established under Mongol patronage brought together teachers and students from different civilizations. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, restored after the Mongol conquest, became a center for translating texts between Arabic, Persian, Chinese, and Mongolian. These institutions preserved and transmitted human knowledge across cultural boundaries. The economic impact of cultural exchange created prosperity that exceeded anything previously achieved. New crops and agricultural techniques increased food production. Improved manufacturing methods enhanced the quality and quantity of goods. Advanced financial instruments facilitated long-distance trade. This economic growth supported larger populations and more complex civilizations. The transformation of Mongol conquerors into settled rulers marked the beginning of a gradual decline that would eventually return nomadic peoples to their traditional role as peripheral actors in world politics. This process reflected the powerful influence of local cultures and the practical difficulties of maintaining nomadic identity while governing sedentary populations. Assimilation into local cultures proceeded at different rates in different regions of the former empire. Mongol rulers in China adopted Chinese governmental methods and cultural practices. Those in Persia became Persian in customs and Islamic in religion. European Mongols gradually adopted Orthodox Christianity and Slavic traditions. This cultural absorption weakened connections between different parts of the empire. Religious conversions played a crucial role in the assimilation process. The abandonment of traditional shamanism for world religions like Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity created new loyalties that competed with ethnic and political identities. Converted Mongols often found they had more in common with their subjects than with their nomadic relatives. Military obsolescence gradually undermined the advantages that had made Mongol conquest possible. The development of gunpowder weapons reduced the effectiveness of traditional cavalry tactics. Improved fortification techniques neutralized the mobility advantages that nomadic armies had enjoyed. European military innovations eventually surpassed Mongol capabilities. Administrative absorption transformed warrior elites into bureaucratic officials who possessed more expertise in governance than in warfare. The skills needed to administer complex sedentary societies differed completely from those required for nomadic leadership. This transformation created administrators who were Mongol in name but sedentary in practice. The end of the nomadic empire occurred gradually as different khanates developed separate identities and interests. Trade disputes between khanates replaced cooperation. Military conflicts erupted between former allies. The empire that had once facilitated global connections became a source of division and conflict. Population changes in the Mongol homeland reduced the human resources available for maintaining empire. Many of the most capable Mongol leaders had relocated to distant territories where opportunities for advancement were greater. The steppes were left with reduced populations that lacked the organization necessary for world conquest. Economic factors also contributed to imperial decline, as the costs of maintaining administrative systems exceeded the benefits derived from conquest. Governing sedentary populations required expensive bureaucracies that consumed resources without generating military capabilities. The empire became financially dependent on subjects rather than militarily dominant over them. The return to the steppes occurred gradually as Mongol political authority contracted from its maximum extent. The Yuan dynasty in China fell to Ming rebels in 1368. The Ilkhanate in Persia fragmented into smaller states. The Golden Horde lost control over Russian territories. Only in Central Asia did Mongol political traditions persist for several more centuries. The legacy of the Mongol Empire survived long after its political disintegration. Trade routes established under Mongol protection continued to facilitate cultural exchange. Administrative techniques developed for governing diverse populations influenced later empires. Military innovations created during Mongol campaigns shaped warfare for centuries. Cultural synthesis promoted by Mongol policies created artistic and intellectual traditions that enriched civilizations throughout Eurasia. The religious tolerance practiced by Mongol rulers provided models for managing diversity in multicultural societies. The technological exchanges facilitated by Mongol trade routes accelerated human development globally. The memory of Mongol achievement inspired later attempts at nomadic conquest and empire building. Tamerlane in Central Asia and the Mughal dynasty in India both claimed Mongol heritage while attempting to recreate nomadic military success. These efforts demonstrated the enduring appeal of the Mongol example. Modern Mongolia's relationship with its imperial past reflects the complex legacy of Genghis Khan and his successors. The transformation from world empire to peripheral state created historical memories that continue to influence Mongol national identity. The achievements of the medieval empire remain sources of pride despite their ultimate impermanence. The military innovations developed under Genghis Khan's leadership revolutionized warfare and influenced military thinking for centuries to come. His organizational systems, tactical approaches, and strategic concepts were studied and adopted by armies throughout Eurasia long after the Mongol Empire had fragmented into separate kingdoms. The decimal military organization represented perhaps the most enduring of Genghis Khan's innovations. The system of organizing armies into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 provided clear command structures that could be adapted to forces of any size. This organizational principle was adopted by Chinese, Islamic, European, and Russian armies during the medieval period. Modern military organizations still reflect the influence of Mongol decimal organization. NATO standardization agreements use similar hierarchical structures for coordinating multinational forces. The concept of building large armies from standardized smaller units remains fundamental to military organization throughout the world. Combined arms tactics developed by Mongol commanders demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinating different types of military units in integrated operations. Heavy and light cavalry, infantry, siege engines, and support troops were coordinated in ways that maximized their individual strengths while compensating for their weaknesses. The principle of combined arms coordination became central to military thinking throughout the medieval and early modern periods. European armies learned to coordinate cavalry, infantry, and artillery through studying accounts of Mongol campaigns. Modern combined arms doctrine traces its intellectual origins to innovations first implemented on the Eurasian steppes. Psychological warfare reached new levels of sophistication under Mongol leadership. The systematic use of terror as a strategic weapon was designed to minimize actual fighting by convincing enemies that resistance was futile. This approach saved Mongol lives while achieving political objectives more efficiently than purely military means. The deliberate cultivation of fearsome reputations became a standard element of military strategy following Mongol examples. Later conquerors, from Tamerlane to Napoleon, understood that psychological impact could be as important as battlefield victories. Modern military doctrine recognizes information warfare and psychological operations as essential components of comprehensive strategy. Intelligence networks established by Genghis Khan provided strategic advantages that often proved more decisive than battlefield tactics. The systematic gathering of information about enemy capabilities, intentions, and weaknesses allowed Mongol commanders to plan campaigns with unprecedented precision and effectiveness. The Mongol approach to intelligence gathering influenced military thinking throughout Eurasia. Chinese generals adopted systematic reconnaissance methods. Islamic commanders developed spy networks. European armies learned the importance of accurate information about enemy dispositions and capabilities. Modern intelligence services trace many of their operational methods to techniques first developed by nomadic armies. Mobility and speed remained central to Mongol military effectiveness throughout their period of expansion. The ability to move large forces rapidly across vast distances provided strategic advantages that compensated for numerical inferiority in many campaigns. Each Mongol warrior's multiple horses allowed sustained high-speed operations that exhausted slower enemies. Modern military thinking continues to emphasize mobility and speed as force multipliers that can overcome material disadvantages. Mechanized warfare, air mobility, and rapid deployment capabilities reflect the same principles that made Mongol armies so effective. The concept that speed can substitute for mass remains relevant to contemporary military planning. Logistics innovations developed during Mongol campaigns enabled operations across distances and in environments that had previously been considered impossible. The ampostal system provided communications capabilities that allowed coordination of widely separated forces. Supply systems supported armies operating far from their home territories for extended periods. The Mongol emphasis on logistical preparation influenced military planning throughout the medieval world. European crusaders learned from Mongol examples about the importance of supply lines and communication systems. Modern military logistics doctrines incorporate many principles first implemented by nomadic armies operating across continental distances. Siege warfare techniques acquired and improved by Mongol forces represented successful adaptation of nomadic armies to challenges that had previously been considered insurmountable. The integration of Chinese, Islamic, and European siege technologies created capabilities that exceeded those of any contemporary force. The flexibility demonstrated by Mongol adaptation to siege warfare influenced military thinking about the importance of technological innovation and tactical adaptation. Armies that could learn and adapt new techniques proved more successful than those that relied solely on traditional methods. This principle remains central to modern military education and doctrine development. Command and control systems developed by Mongol armies enabled coordination of operations across unprecedented distances and involving diverse types of forces. Signal systems, messenger networks, and standardized procedures allowed complex maneuvers to be executed by forces spread across entire continents. Modern military command and control systems reflect many principles first implemented by Mongol armies. The importance of clear communication, standardized procedures, and flexible response to changing conditions remains central to military effectiveness. The concept of mission-type orders that allow subordinate initiative within overall strategic guidance traces its origins to nomadic military practices. The administrative and legal innovations developed during Genghis Khan's reign created governmental structures that influenced political development throughout Eurasia. His approaches to religious tolerance, meritocratic advancement, trade protection, and legal standardization provided models that were studied and adapted by later empires and civilizations. Religious tolerance implemented by Mongol administration represented a revolutionary approach to governing diverse populations. At a time when most empires imposed their rulers' religions on conquered subjects, Mongol policy protected all faiths equally under imperial law. This principle attracted voluntary submission from religious minorities while preventing conflicts that had destroyed previous empires. The Mongol example of religious tolerance influenced later empires including the Ottoman, Mughal, and Russian states. European Enlightenment thinkers studied Mongol policies while developing theories about religious freedom and separation of church and state. Modern concepts of religious liberty trace their intellectual origins partly to innovations first implemented on the Eurasian steppes. Meritocracy represented another revolutionary aspect of Mongol administration. Promotion based on demonstrated ability rather than birth or traditional social status created opportunities for talented individuals from all backgrounds. This principle attracted capable administrators and military leaders while ensuring that the most competent people held important positions. The Mongol emphasis on merit-based advancement influenced administrative development throughout the medieval world. Chinese civil service systems incorporated elements of Mongol practice. Islamic governments adopted similar approaches to identifying and promoting capable officials. European states gradually moved away from purely hereditary systems toward merit-based appointments. Trade protection provided by Mongol administration created the most extensive and secure commercial network in medieval history. Merchants could travel safely from Europe to China, while carrying valuable goods across territories controlled by different political authorities. Standardized weights, measures, and currencies facilitated commerce between diverse civilizations. The Mongol approach to trade protection influenced commercial development throughout Eurasia. The concept that governments should actively protect and promote trade rather than simply taxing it became accepted wisdom. Modern international trade agreements reflect principles first implemented by nomadic administrators governing transcontinental commercial networks. Legal uniformity achieved through the Yasa provided consistent governance across territories that encompassed dozens of different cultures, languages, and legal traditions. The application of standardized laws created predictable conditions for both subjects and administrators while maintaining local customs in areas that did not affect imperial interests. The principle of legal standardization influenced legal development throughout the medieval and early modern periods. European legal codes incorporated concepts derived from study of Mongol administrative practices. Modern international law reflects many principles first implemented for governing multicultural empires that spanned multiple continents. Communication systems developed by Mongol administration enabled coordination of governmental activities across unprecedented distances. The Ampostal relay system allowed messages to travel from one end of the empire to the other in weeks rather than months. This capability made effective central administration possible despite the vast territorial extent. The Mongol postal system provided models for communication networks that influenced governmental development throughout Eurasia. Chinese administrative systems adopted similar relay networks. European postal services traced their origins to techniques learned from Mongol examples. Modern communication systems reflect organizational principles first implemented by nomadic administrators. Administrative flexibility demonstrated by Mongol governance allowed effective rule over populations with vastly different cultural backgrounds and economic systems. Nomadic, agricultural, and urban populations were governed using methods appropriate to their specific conditions while maintaining overall imperial unity and coordination. The Mongol example of administrative adaptation influenced governmental theory and practice throughout the medieval world. The concept that effective administration must be tailored to local conditions while maintaining overall coherence became accepted wisdom. Modern federal systems and devolved governance reflect principles first implemented by nomadic administrators. Diplomatic immunity and international law concepts were advanced through Mongol administrative practices. The protection of envoys and diplomatic missions was considered sacred under Mongol law. Commercial agreements between different parts of the empire created precedents for international commercial law that influenced later developments. The Mongol contribution to international law influenced diplomatic development throughout the medieval and early modern periods. European diplomatic practices incorporated many concepts derived from studying Mongol administrative methods. Modern international law traces many of its fundamental principles to innovations first implemented by nomadic governments governing transcontinental empires. The cultural and social transformations initiated during Genghis Khan's reign created changes that influenced human development throughout Eurasia and beyond. The genetic, demographic, cultural and social legacies of Mongol expansion continue to shape populations and societies 8 centuries after the empire's creation. The genetic legacy of Mongol expansion represents one of the most measurable impacts of medieval conquest. Modern genetic studies suggest that millions of people across Asia carry genetic markers associated with Mongol expansion. The Y chromosome lineage linked to Genghis Khan and his male relatives appears in populations from Korea to Eastern Europe. Contemporary populations in Mongolia, Central Asia, China, Russia and the Middle East show significant genetic influences from medieval Mongol expansion. These genetic connections create cultural and historical bonds that transcend modern political boundaries. The biological legacy of empire continues to influence regional politics and cultural identity. Cultural exchange facilitated by Mongol administration created the most extensive interaction between East and West in human history prior to the modern era. Chinese technology reached Europe centuries earlier than would have occurred through other channels. Islamic science influenced Chinese medicine. European craftsmanship enhanced Asian manufacturing. The acceleration of cultural exchange under Mongol protection created foundations for later global interactions. The precedent of transcontinental cultural communication established patterns that influenced later exploration, colonization, and trade. Modern globalization reflects processes that began during the medieval period under nomadic administration. Urbanization patterns were dramatically altered by Mongol conquest and administration. Many cities were completely destroyed and rebuilt according to new plans that reflected imperial priorities. New urban centers were established in locations chosen for strategic or economic advantages rather than historical precedent. The reconstruction of urban centers under Mongol administration incorporated architectural and planning techniques from multiple civilizations. Cities built during this period combined Chinese, Islamic, European, and nomadic design elements. These urban innovations influenced city planning throughout Eurasia for centuries following the empire's fragmentation. Religious syncretism encouraged by Mongol policies created new forms of spiritual expression that combined elements from different faith traditions. Buddhist, Islamic, Christian, and shamanic practices influenced each other through sustained contact under conditions of mutual protection and respect. The religious mixing that occurred under Mongol protection created theological and philosophical developments that enriched all participating traditions. New forms of art, music, literature, and architecture emerged from this cultural synthesis. These creative innovations influenced cultural development throughout Eurasia long after the empire's political fragmentation. Women's status in societies conquered by the Mongols was often improved through contact with nomadic customs that provided greater freedom and authority to women than was typical in sedentary civilizations. Mongol women participated in trade, politics, and even military activities in ways that influenced attitudes throughout the empire. The relatively high status of women in Mongol society influenced gender relationships throughout territories under imperial control. Chinese, Islamic, and European women gained opportunities and freedoms through contact with nomadic customs. These changes in women's status contributed to social transformations that continued long after Mongol political control had ended. Demographic movements initiated by Mongol expansion created population distributions that continue to influence regional politics and cultural identity. Massive relocations of craftsmen, administrators, and entire populations created ethnically mixed communities throughout Eurasia. The demographic legacy of Mongol population policies influenced ethnic and cultural development throughout the territories of the former empire. Modern national boundaries and ethnic distributions reflect population movements that occurred during the medieval period under nomadic administration. Educational and intellectual developments were profoundly influenced by the cultural exchange that Mongol protection facilitated. Scholars from different civilizations collaborated on projects that no single culture could have accomplished independently. This intellectual cooperation created new forms of knowledge and understanding. The translation movements supported by Mongol administration preserved and transmitted knowledge between civilizations that might otherwise have been lost. Classical Greek texts survived through Arabic translations. Chinese technological knowledge reached Europe through Islamic intermediaries. This intellectual preservation and transmission enriched human knowledge globally. Contemporary understanding of Genghis Khan and his empire has undergone dramatic revision as modern scholarship has moved beyond traditional narratives of barbarian conquest to recognize the complexity and significance of Mongol contributions to human development. This reassessment reflects both new historical evidence and changing perspectives on the relationship between nomadic and sedentary civilizations. Historical revisionism has transformed Genghis Khan from a figure of pure destructive force into a complex leader whose innovations influenced human development in profound and lasting ways. Modern historians recognize that Mongol administrative, military, and cultural achievements created foundations for many aspects of the modern world. The shift from viewing Genghis Khan as a villain to recognizing him as a transformative historical figure reflects broader changes in historical methodology and perspective. The emphasis on cultural exchange, technological transfer, and institutional innovation has revealed positive aspects of Mongol rule that were overlooked by earlier historical accounts focused primarily on conquest and destruction. Environmental impact studies have revealed unexpected consequences of Mongol expansion that influence global climate and ecological development. The depopulation of certain regions through conquest and disease created opportunities for forest regrowth that may have influenced global carbon cycles and climate patterns. Research into the environmental consequences of medieval population changes has suggested that Mongol conquests may have contributed to climate cooling during the medieval period. The abandonment of agricultural land and the regrowth of forests in depopulated regions created carbon absorption that influenced global climate patterns. These findings demonstrate the global impact of regional historical events. Technological transfer facilitated by Mongol administration accelerated human development in ways that continue to influence the modern world. The movement of innovations like gunpowder, printing, and navigation instruments between civilizations created foundations for later scientific and technological revolutions. Modern understanding of technological development emphasizes the importance of cultural contact and exchange in accelerating innovation. The Mongol Empire's role in facilitating these exchanges contributed to technological developments that shaped the early modern and modern periods. Contemporary globalization reflects processes that began under nomadic administration. The precedent for globalization established by the Mongol Empire created the first truly world system of economic, cultural, and political interaction. The integration of Eurasian economies, the protection of international trade, and the facilitation of cultural exchange established patterns that influence contemporary global development. Modern economic integration reflects many principles first implemented by Mongol administration. The concept of free trade across cultural boundaries, the protection of commercial activities by political authorities, and the standardization of weights, measures, and currencies all have precedence in medieval nomadic governance. National symbolism in modern Mongolia reflects the complex legacy of Genghis Khan and his empire. The transformation from world conqueror to national father figure demonstrates how historical memory can be adapted to serve contemporary political and cultural needs. The revival of Genghis Khan as a symbol of Mongol national identity following the end of Soviet control reflects the enduring power of historical achievement to influence modern political development. Archaeological research, cultural preservation, and tourism development have all contributed to renewed appreciation for Mongolia's imperial legacy. Academic scholarship continues to reveal new aspects of Mongol history and its global significance. Archaeological discoveries provide physical evidence of Mongol administrative and military capabilities. Genetic studies demonstrate the biological legacy of medieval population movements. Economic analysis reveals the global impact of Mongol trade policies. The ongoing reassessment of Mongol contributions to human development reflects the dynamic nature of historical understanding. New evidence and analytical methods continue to reveal previously unknown aspects of medieval history, while demonstrating the contemporary relevance of historical processes that occurred centuries ago. In modern Mongolia, Genghis Khan has been transformed from historical figure into national father, a symbol of Mongol identity that transcends the centuries between his medieval empire and the contemporary nation-state. This transformation reflects both the enduring power of his achievements and the human need to connect present identity with past greatness. The revival of Genghis Khan's memory following Mongolia's transition from Soviet satellite to independent nation represents one of the most dramatic examples of historical resurrection in the modern world. During the communist period, his legacy was suppressed as incompatible with socialist ideology. Since 1990, he has become central to Mongol national consciousness. Archaeological discoveries throughout Mongolia continue to provide new insights into the daily life, military organization, and administrative capabilities of the medieval empire. Excavations at Karakoram have revealed the multicultural character of the imperial capital. Fortress sites throughout Mongolia demonstrate the sophistication of Mongol military engineering. The search for Genghis Khan's burial site has become one of archaeology's greatest challenges and most enduring mysteries. Despite decades of searching using the most advanced techniques available, the location remains unknown. This mystery has become part of his legend while preserving the secret he intended to maintain for eternity. Archaeological research has revealed aspects of Mongol civilization that written sources never recorded. The material culture discovered through excavation demonstrates technological sophistication, artistic achievement, and economic prosperity that complement literary accounts of military conquest and political innovation. Cultural preservation efforts in modern Mongolia attempt to maintain nomadic traditions that connect contemporary people with their medieval ancestors. Traditional herding practices, felt-making techniques, and horse-based transportation are preserved not just as museum displays but as living cultural practices. The maintenance of traditional Mongol customs serves both cultural and economic purposes in the modern nation. Tourism development depends partly on authentic demonstrations of historical lifestyles. Cultural identity formation requires connections between contemporary people and their ancestral achievements. Tourist sites throughout Mongolia commemorate different aspects of Genghis Khan's legacy and the empire he created. The massive statue complex at Sonjin Boldog provides a modern shrine to his memory. Museums in Ulaanbaatar display artifacts that connect visitors with medieval achievements. The development of historical tourism has created economic opportunities for contemporary Mongolians while spreading knowledge of their ancestors' achievements throughout the world. International visitors learn about Mongol contributions to world history, while contributing to the modern nation's economic development. Academic scholarship continues to revolutionize understanding of Mongol history and its global significance. International research collaborations bring together historians, archaeologists, geneticists, and specialists from many other fields. Their work reveals previously unknown aspects of medieval life and its contemporary relevance. The secret history of the Mongols, discovered and translated in the modern period, provides unique insights into Mongol culture and Genghis Khan's personal development. This primary source offers perspectives on medieval life that no other document preserves, making it invaluable for understanding nomadic civilization. Contemporary genetic research has revealed the biological legacy of medieval population movements, while demonstrating connections between modern populations and historical events. The distribution of genetic markers associated with Mongol expansion provides measurable evidence of medieval demographic changes that influenced human development. The leadership principles demonstrated by Genghis Khan offer insights that remain relevant for contemporary managers, military leaders, and political figures. His emphasis on meritocracy, adaptability, and strategic vision created an organizational culture that achieved unprecedented success under challenging conditions. Meritocratic advancement based on proven ability rather than inherited status or traditional privilege created opportunities for talented individuals from all backgrounds. This approach attracted capable followers while ensuring that the most competent people held positions of responsibility. Modern organizations that emphasize performance over credentials follow similar principles. The adaptability demonstrated throughout Genghis Khan's career enabled him to succeed in environments ranging from nomadic steppes to urban civilizations. His willingness to learn from enemies, adopt new technologies, and modify traditional approaches provided flexibility that proved crucial for long-term success. Strategic vision that looked beyond immediate objectives toward long-term goals enabled planning and resource allocation that achieved results exceeding what seemed possible. The transformation from tribal leader to world emperor required thinking that transcended traditional nomadic horizons while building on nomadic strengths. Military lessons derived from Mongol campaigns continue to influence contemporary strategic thinking. The emphasis on mobility, intelligence gathering, and psychological operations provides principles that remain relevant despite technological changes in warfare. The importance of accurate intelligence demonstrated by Mongol success emphasizes the value of information in competitive environments. Contemporary military, business, and political leaders who understand their opponent's capabilities and intentions possess advantages that can compensate for material disadvantages. Mobility and speed as force multipliers that can overcome numerical or material disadvantages remain relevant to contemporary strategic thinking. Modern military doctrine emphasizes rapid deployment and maneuver warfare. Business strategies that emphasize quick response to market changes reflect similar principles. Diplomatic insights derived from Mongol international relations demonstrate the value of pragmatism over ideology in achieving political objectives. The willingness to make alliances based on practical benefit rather than cultural similarity enabled cooperation that achieved results impossible through purely ideological approaches. The balance between negotiation and force demonstrated by Mongol diplomacy provides models for contemporary international relations. The combination of credible military capability with genuine diplomatic engagement created options that purely military or purely diplomatic approaches could not achieve. Economic wisdom demonstrated by Mongol trade policies emphasizes the importance of protecting and promoting commerce, rather than simply extracting revenue from it. The understanding that economic prosperity creates resources for political and military objectives provides insights relevant to contemporary policy making. The protection of international trade that characterized Mongol administration created prosperity that benefited all participants while generating resources for imperial expansion. Contemporary economic policies that facilitate rather than restrict international commerce follow similar principles. Technological adoption and adaptation enabled Mongol forces to excel in diverse environments while maintaining their core advantages. The willingness to learn from conquered peoples and integrate useful innovations into traditional practices provides models for contemporary organizations facing technological change. Cultural understanding demonstrated by Mongol religious tolerance and administrative flexibility enabled effective governance of diverse populations. The recognition that different groups require different approaches while maintaining overall unity provides insights relevant to contemporary multicultural management. The synthesis of different cultural traditions created innovations that exceeded what any single culture could have achieved independently. Contemporary organizations that effectively integrate diverse perspectives and approaches often achieve results that exceed the capabilities of more homogeneous groups. The shamanic legacy of Tengri worship continues to influence Mongol character and worldview 8 centuries after Genghis Khan's death. The concept of the eternal blue sky as the source of ultimate authority and natural order provides spiritual foundations that transcend political and social changes. The connection to nature that characterized nomadic spirituality created environmental awareness and respect for natural processes that remains relevant to contemporary ecological concerns. The understanding that human society must work in harmony with natural systems provides wisdom that modern civilization increasingly recognizes as essential. Traditional Mongol spirituality emphasized the interconnectedness of all life and the importance of maintaining balance between human activities and natural processes. These beliefs created sustainable relationships with the environment that supported nomadic civilization for millennia. The cyclical understanding of time that characterized shamanic worldview recognized the rise and fall of empires as natural processes rather than permanent achievements. This perspective provides wisdom about the temporary nature of human institutions while emphasizing the enduring importance of natural and spiritual principles. The recognition that individual achievement occurs within larger historical and natural contexts provides perspective on the relationship between personal ambition and social responsibility. Genghis Khan's success was understood as reflecting divine favor rather than purely individual capability. Individual achievement demonstrated by Genghis Khan's transformation from tribal outcast to world emperor illustrates the potential for personal determination and capability to influence the course of human history. His example shows how one person's vision and effort can create changes that affect millions of lives across centuries. The balance between individual initiative and collective responsibility that characterized Mongol society provides models for contemporary leadership that combines personal achievement with social contribution. The understanding that individual success depends on community support while contributing to collective welfare offers wisdom relevant to modern organizational leadership. The continuing journey of human history places Genghis Khan's achievements within the larger story of human development and cultural evolution. His empire represents one chapter in the ongoing process of human interaction and development that continues to influence contemporary life. The patterns of cultural exchange, technological transfer, and political innovation that characterized the Mongol Empire provide precedents for contemporary globalization, while demonstrating both the opportunities and challenges created by increased human interaction. The recognition that history is an ongoing human story rather than a completed narrative provides perspective on contemporary challenges while emphasizing the continuing importance of individual and collective choices in shaping future development. Under the eternal blue sky that witnessed Genghis Khan's rise from orphaned outcast to master of the world's largest empire, the steppes of Mongolia continue to nurture the memories of greatness achieved and the possibilities that remain. The wind that carries the scent of grass and the sound of horses' hooves across the vast grasslands speaks of journeys completed and adventures yet to come. In this land where earth meets sky at the far horizon, the spirit of the great Khan rides eternal, reminding us that human determination and vision can reshape the world itself. The story ends where it began, under the infinite dome of the sky that the Mongols called Tengri. Here, in the silence of the steppes where only the wind speaks, we remember the child born clutching a blood clot who became the man who held the world in his grasp. His empire has passed into history, but his legacy echoes through the centuries, a testament to the power of the human spirit to transcend every limitation and achieve the impossible. In the eternal blue sky above Mongolia, Genghis Khan rides forever, and his story continues in every person who dares to dream of changing the world.